In this video, we invite you to step beyond the walls of Westeros and journey deep into the heart of one of the greatest stories ever told. Accompanied by the sounds of rain and nature, this audiobook-style experience will take you through the world of George R.R. Martin, from the spark of imagination that gave birth to his epic saga, to the sweeping histories, the intricate politics, the moral grayness, and the mythic power that define his work. You'll hear about the origins of the series, the inspirations drawn from real-world history and culture, and the unforgettable characters who became icons of modern storytelling. We'll explore how Martin's world-building redefined fantasy, how his themes of power, identity, and legacy resonate far beyond the page, and how A Song of Ice and Fire evolved from a work of fiction into a global cultural movement. This is more than a reading, it's a reflection on a story that changed how we understand heroes and villains, fate and freedom, humanity and history. So sit back, relax, and let the sound of the rain guide you. Close your eyes and return to a world where kings and queens play their deadly games, where dragons sleep beneath the mountains, and where winter, always, is coming. Chapter 1: The Dreamer from Bayonne. Long before dragons soared over television screens and the words "winter is coming" became part of the global lexicon, there was a quiet, bespectacled boy in Bayonne, New Jersey, whose imagination stretched far beyond the confines of his working-class neighborhood. George Raymond Richard Martin was born in 1948 into a world that was in many ways small, a modest apartment near the docks, parents who lived paycheck to paycheck, but from the beginning, he sought to escape those boundaries through stories. He devoured comic books and pulp magazines, wrote letters to editors before he was a teenager, and crafted his first tales about kingdoms, monsters, and heroes on cheap paper he would staple together into homemade books. In those early acts of creation, one can already glimpse the restless ambition of a storyteller who would one day redefine modern fantasy. Martin did not simply want to read stories, he wanted to build worlds. As he grew older, the worlds he built grew richer and darker. He was drawn not only to the escapist wonders of Tolkien and Robert E. Howard but also to the complex moral textures of historical fiction and classic literature. Jack Vance's Dying Earth tales, with their sardonic tone and ambiguous characters, showed him that fantasy could be more than a straightforward struggle between good and evil. The historical novels of Maurice Druon, steeped in political intrigue and human weakness, planted seeds that would later bloom in Westeros' tangled power games. Even the comic books he cherished, with their flawed heroes and layered mythologies, taught him that stories thrive when characters are neither entirely noble nor irredeemably villainous. These influences, diverse and sometimes contradictory, converged to shape Martin's fundamental storytelling philosophy, that fantasy, at its best, is not an escape from reality but a mirror to it. The young Martin's imagination was also fed by the real world unfolding around him, which was far from the simple morality plays of pulp fiction. He came of age in a nation fractured by the Vietnam War, rocked by civil rights struggles, and disillusioned by political scandal. He watched leaders lie and systems fail, saw idealism tarnished by power, and absorbed the uncomfortable truth that history is rarely written in black and white. These experiences did more than make him cynical, they made him curious. They taught him that power corrupts in subtle ways, that noble causes often hide brutal compromises, and that heroes and villains can switch roles depending on where one stands. This worldview would later underpin the thematic backbone of A Song of Ice and Fire, a series that rejects simplistic notions of good and evil in favor of a landscape where morality is a shifting, contested terrain. Before Martin ever set foot in Westeros, however, he had to learn the craft of storytelling on a professional level. He pursued a degree in journalism, taught writing, and penned science fiction and horror stories that earned him modest acclaim but little fortune. His early novels, rich in imagination but often commercially overlooked, taught him the discipline and patience necessary to sustain a long-form narrative. A pivotal chapter in his creative evolution came when he began working in Hollywood as a television writer and producer. The experience taught him hard lessons about structure, pacing, and the demands of serialized storytelling. It also taught him frustration. The constraints of network budgets and executive decisions often stifled the scope of his ideas. One unrealized project, a sprawling science fiction epic, was scrapped for being too big to film, That disappointment planted a seed of defiance. If television could not contain the worlds in his head, perhaps the page could. The moment when those lessons and frustrations coalesced into destiny arrived in 1991, when Martin began writing a scene that would change his life, a boy named Bran climbing a tower and seeing something he was never meant to see. It was not part of any planned project, nor was it intended as the start of a magnum opus. Yet that chapter, born almost spontaneously, contained in it the DNA of a world too vivid and too alive to remain unwritten. As Martin wrote deeper into the story, new characters appeared, new kingdoms emerged, and a vast, interconnected history unfolded almost of its own accord. What began as a single book quickly ballooned beyond its initial scope. He had set out to write a trilogy. Soon, it was clear he was building something far larger, a living, breathing history disguised as fantasy. The scale of Martin's ambition cannot be overstated. He did not want to tell a single heroic journey but rather an entire epoch of human struggle, with hundreds of characters, competing dynasties, and centuries of backstory shaping every decision and betrayal. This ambition placed him in a lineage of epic world-builders stretching back to Tolkien, yet Martin's approach diverged sharply from those who came before. Where Tolkien's Middle-earth was a mythic, almost timeless realm shaped by ancient archetypes, Martin's Westeros was deeply historical, a world driven by inheritance, law, economics, geography, and the brutal logic of power. Its kings were not demigods but men and women with egos, grudges, and insecurities. Its wars were not destined battles between cosmic forces but messy, unpredictable struggles fought for land, legacy, and survival. Even the title Martin eventually chose, A Song of Ice and Fire, speaks to his larger vision. It is not a straightforward reference to dragons or winter but a metaphor for the eternal tension that defines both history and human nature, passion and restraint, chaos and order, life and death. It suggests a world where conflict is not an aberration but a fundamental condition of existence. In this sense, the series is not just a fantasy epic but a meditation on history itself, how it is made, how it is remembered, and how it repeats. By the time A Game of Thrones was published in 1996, Martin had poured decades of observation, study, and imagination into its pages. The book was both familiar and startlingly new. It drew from the grand traditions of epic fantasy while dismantling many of its comforting illusions. There were no chosen ones destined to save the world, no invincible heroes protected by narrative armor. By the time A Game of Thrones was published in 1996, George R.R. Martin had poured decades of observation, study, and a fertile imagination into its pages. The book emerged as a groundbreaking work, simultaneously familiar and startlingly new. It drew deeply from the grand traditions of epic fantasy, invoking the sweeping scope, intricate world building, and multifaceted characters that defined the genre. Yet, even as it embraced these conventions, A Game of Thrones set about dismantling many of its comforting illusions. This was not a world where destiny shielded a chosen few. There were no chosen ones destined to unilaterally save the world from an unambiguous evil. Instead, a complex web of political machinations, personal ambitions, and moral ambiguities governed the fates of its inhabitants. Furthermore, the narrative offered no quarter to invincible heroes, those figures typically protected by an impenetrable narrative armor that ensured their ultimate triumph and survival. Death, betrayal, and unforeseen consequences were ever-present threats, capable of striking down even the most prominent and seemingly indispensable characters, imbuing the story with a potent sense of realism and unpredictability that revolutionized the genre. The world of Westeros felt alarmingly real precisely because it followed the same merciless logic as our own. In that realism, that willingness to let history unfold without divine intervention or moral certainty, lay the seeds of its eventual global appeal. In many ways, Martin's path to creating A Song of Ice and Fire mirrors the very themes that animate his work: ambition clashing with limitation, idealism tempered by hard reality, and the unpredictable consequences of choices made long before their outcomes are clear. The boy from Bayonne who once wrote stories on stapled sheets of paper had grown into a writer capable of weaving a tapestry vast enough to hold not only dragons and kings but the entire spectrum of human behavior. The dream that began as an escape from a small apartment on the docks had become something much more profound, a mirror held up to humanity itself, forged in the cold steel of history and the burning fire of imagination. So if you're still awake, let the rain keep falling, and remember to like, subscribe, and stay with us as the story unfolds. The song has only just begun. Chapter 2: The Literary and Historical Lineage. The world of Westeros, for all its dragons and sorcery, is not a world born purely from imagination. It is a mosaic stitched together from centuries of human history, a fictional landscape that mirrors the real-world past with striking familiarity. George R.R. Martin has often said that while he loves Tolkien's work deeply, he wanted to take fantasy out of the nursery and into the grimmer, more complex world of adults. To do that, he turned not to myths or fairy tales, but to chronicles and annals, the messy, violent, and deeply human stories of our own world. The history that shaped A Song of Ice and Fire is not the story of noble quests or divine destiny, but of power seized and lost, of betrayals and marriages, of bloodlines that rise and fall on the whims of ambition and chance. One of the most direct historical influences on Martin's saga is the Wars of the Roses, the brutal series of English civil wars fought between the rival houses of Lancaster and York in the 15th century. The echoes are clear. The Starks and Lannisters are literary descendants of York and Lancaster, two powerful dynasties whose rivalry for the throne drenched England in blood. The shifting alliances, betrayals, and political marriages that define the struggle for the Iron Throne are drawn straight from this turbulent period. Even the way Martin depicts noble houses, as both symbols of identity and instruments of propaganda, mirrors the medieval obsession with lineage and legitimacy. But Martin does not merely copy history, he distills its essence and reconfigures it to serve his story. Westeros is not England, yet it is built on the same foundations of feudal power and dynastic ambition. The Wars of the Roses are just one thread in the historical tapestry Martin weaves. The social and political fabric of Westeros also draws from the broader canvas of medieval Europe. The feudal system, with its web of vassalage and personal loyalty, informs the entire political structure of the Seven Kingdoms. Castles, knights, and the code of chivalry are presented not as romantic ideals but as lived realities, institutions that are both noble and deeply flawed. Knights in Martin's world are often brutal men hiding behind the thin veneer of honor, and the rigid class hierarchies of feudal society create both stability and suffocating injustice. This nuanced portrayal reflects Martin's understanding that history is never simple. The same system that produced courtly love and gallant deeds also birthed serfdom, exploitation, and centuries of war. Further east, across the narrow sea, Essos bears the imprint of other historical empires. The free cities evoke the mercantile republics of Renaissance Italy, with their merchant oligarchies, financial power, and shifting alliances. The vast Dothraki Sea, where nomadic horse lords sweep across the plains, owes much to the Mongol hordes and the fear they inspired in settled civilizations. Even the Valyrian freehold, the fallen empire whose legacy looms over much of Martin's world, draws from a blend of Roman imperialism and the legend of Atlantis, a civilization that conquered through military and technological superiority, only to be consumed by its own cataclysm. These echoes lend Essos a depth that makes it feel like a real continent with its own layered history rather than a mere backdrop for the plot. Religious and cultural influences are woven just as deeply into the series' DNA. The faith of the Seven, with its septs, rituals, and complex ecclesiastical hierarchy, mirrors the structure and political power of the medieval Catholic Church. The faith's influence on law, legitimacy, and governance reflects how religion once shaped, and often constrained, royal authority in Europe. In contrast, the worship of the old gods in the north recalls the animist and pagan traditions of pre-Christian Europe, with their reverence for nature and ancestral spirits. Meanwhile, the fiery monotheism of Arlor, the Lord of Light, captures the fervor and absolutism of certain historical religious movements, crusading zeal, prophetic cults, and apocalyptic visions that have periodically swept through human societies. Martin's debt to history extends beyond events and institutions. It informs the psychology of his characters and the logic of their decisions. The Red Wedding, for example, was inspired by real massacres like Scotland's Black Dinner and the Massacre of Glencoe, brutal betrayals that shattered bonds of hospitality and reshaped political landscapes. Tywin Lannister's ruthless strategies evoke the cold pragmatism of historical figures like Richelieu or Bismarck, while Daenerys Targaryen's campaigns of conquest echo the paradoxes faced by Alexander the Great and Napoleon, liberators to some, tyrants to others. These parallels are not coincidences but deliberate choices, designed to anchor the story's drama in the same moral grayness that defines real history. Even Martin's approach to storytelling itself is shaped by his reading of history. Traditional fantasy often follows a linear narrative driven by a single heroic arc. Martin rejects this model in favor of a sprawling, multi-perspective structure that resembles the way historians piece together the past, through conflicting accounts, biased chronicles, and partial truths. Just as no historian can fully capture the complexity of a historical event, no single character in A Song of Ice and Fire can comprehend the entirety of the struggle for power. The reader, like a historian, must sift through competing narratives to approach something resembling truth. This structural choice gives the series a sense of realism rarely found in fantasy, grounding even its most fantastical elements in the messy, subjective experience of human events. At its core, Martin's use of history is more than just a source of inspiration, it is a statement about the nature of power and human behavior. History, as he portrays it, is cyclical, empires rise and fall, noble houses ascend and crumble, and the same patterns of ambition, betrayal, and war repeat across centuries. Dragons and magic may add spectacle, but they do not fundamentally alter the human condition. This worldview lends A Song of Ice and Fire a weight that transcends its genre. It is not merely a tale of kings and conquerors but a meditation on why humans continue to fight the same battles and make the same mistakes, even when the stakes could not be higher. By rooting his fantasy in the soil of real history, Martin achieves something extraordinary. He creates a world that feels as old and complex as our own, one where the lines between fiction and reality blur until the reader forgets which is which. In doing so, he honors the past while reimagining it, proving that the greatest fantasy stories are not escapes from history but conversations with it. And just as historians continue to argue about the motives of kings and the causes of wars centuries after they occurred, so too will readers debate the choices of Martin's characters long after the final page is turned. The world of ice and fire may be imaginary, but the forces that shape it are as real, and as relentless, as history itself. Chapter 3, Dark Realism, History, and Moral Ambiguity. When George R.R. Martin set out to write A Song of Ice and Fire, he was not interested in creating a world where virtue triumphed inevitably over evil or where heroes were protected by destiny. He was, instead, determined to craft a story that reflected the complicated, often contradictory nature of real life, a world where noble intentions can lead to ruin, where evil is committed in the name of good, and where the most consequential decisions are often born not from destiny but from fear, desire, or desperation. This emphasis on moral complexity did not arise in a vacuum. It was shaped by Martin's personal experiences, his reading of history, and his disillusionment with the simplistic binaries that dominate much of traditional fantasy. The cultural climate in which Martin matured as a writer was one defined by cynicism and doubt. He came of age during the Vietnam War, a conflict that shattered America's sense of moral clarity and exposed the gulf between rhetoric and reality. He lived through the Watergate scandal, which revealed the rot lurking beneath the surface of democratic institutions. These events, and many like them, eroded the comforting belief that leaders were guided by virtue and that justice inevitably prevailed. For Martin, they demonstrated that power is often wielded by those least worthy of it, that noble ideals are frequently corrupted, and that history is written in shades of grey rather than black and white. These lessons seeped into his fiction, shaping a narrative that refuses to offer easy answers or tidy resolutions. In many ways, A Song of Ice and Fire is a deliberate rejection of the conventions established by earlier fantasy giants. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, for example, presents a world where good and evil are clearly defined, where the forces of darkness are unmistakably malevolent, and where the triumph of virtue is a foregone conclusion. Martin deeply admires Tolkien, but he saw an opportunity to push the genre beyond the comfort of moral absolutes. In his world, the villains are not embodiments of cosmic evil but deeply human figures driven by ambition, vengeance, or ideology. The heroes are not paragons of virtue but flawed, conflicted individuals capable of betrayal and cruelty. By blurring the line between good and evil, Martin not only reflects the moral complexity of real history but also challenges readers to confront their own assumptions about justice, morality, and power. This complexity is perhaps most evident in the political landscape of Westeros, where every faction believes itself justified and every action can be interpreted as both noble and self-serving. Consider the rivalry between Stannis Baratheon and Renly for the Iron Throne. Stannis sees himself as the lawful heir, upholding the sanctity of succession and the rule of law. Renly, by contrast, believes the realm needs a charismatic, beloved leader who can unify a fractured kingdom. Both arguments hold weight, and both men genuinely believe they are acting in the best interest of the realm. Yet their competing claims plunge Westeros deeper into chaos, demonstrating how even sincere convictions can have catastrophic consequences when wielded in pursuit of power. Martin's commitment to moral ambiguity extends beyond politics and into the psychology of his characters. Take Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer. Introduced as an arrogant villain who pushed a child from a tower, Jaime is initially easy to despise. But as his story unfolds, layers of complexity emerge. We learn of the impossible moral choice he faced during Robert's rebellion, to obey his king's orders to burn the city or to save hundreds of thousands of innocent lives by committing regicide. In choosing the latter, Jaime sacrificed his honor to prevent a massacre, yet he is reviled as an oath-breaker. This paradox encapsulates one of Martin's central themes, that moral judgment is often shaped more by appearances and narratives than by truth. Jaime is both hero and villain, savior and sinner, and it is precisely this contradiction that makes him compelling. Even the seemingly pure-hearted characters are not spared from this complexity. Ned Stark is often hailed as the moral center of the series, a man who values honor above all else. Yet his unwavering adherence to principle blinds him to the political realities of King's Landing and ultimately leads to his downfall. His execution serves as a stark lesson that virtue, while admirable, does not guarantee survival in a world where power is often indifferent to morality. Daenerys Targaryen, too, embodies this tension. Driven by a desire to free the oppressed and create a better world, she nonetheless employs fire and blood to achieve her goals, raising difficult questions about the cost of justice and the fine line between liberator and tyrant. This relentless ambiguity serves a larger purpose beyond character development. It reflects Martin's fundamental belief about human nature, that people are shaped by circumstances, capable of both cruelty and compassion, and often convinced of their own righteousness even when committing atrocities. It is a worldview grounded in history, where revolutions born of noble ideals have often descended into tyranny and leaders who promised peace have unleashed devastating wars. By mirroring this reality, Martin forces readers to grapple with uncomfortable truths, that evil is not an external force to be vanquished but a potential within us all, and that good intentions are no guarantee of good outcomes. The unpredictability of Martin's world is another key element of its realism. In most fantasy stories, protagonists are shielded by the invisible armor of narrative necessity. Their survival is essential to the story's continuation. Martin rejects this notion completely. Characters die unexpectedly, often senselessly, because that is how life and history work. The death of Ned Stark in the first book shocked readers precisely because it violated a fundamental expectation, that the noble hero must endure to see justice done. By stripping away that safety net, Martin heightens the stakes of his narrative and reinforces his central message, that history is not shaped by destiny but by chance, choice, and consequence. The result of all this is a story that feels less like a myth and more like a chronicle, a record of flawed people navigating an unforgiving world. The decisions characters make are not dictated by archetype or plot necessity but by fear, love, ambition, and desperation. Their victories are often hollow, their defeats sometimes unjust, and their legacies shaped as much by perception as by fact. In this way, A Song of Ice and Fire becomes more than a work of fantasy. It becomes a study of power and morality, an exploration of why people fight, betray, and destroy in pursuit of ideals that are often impossible to achieve. Through this lens of dark realism, Martin transforms the genre itself. Fantasy, once seen as a refuge from reality, becomes a tool for interrogating it. The dragons, prophecies, and ancient evils are there, but they are never allowed to obscure the deeper truths about humanity that lie beneath the surface. Power corrupts. Good men fail. History repeats. And in the end, the line between hero and villain is not a boundary but a spectrum, shifting with time, perspective, and circumstance. This is the moral landscape of A Song of Ice and Fire, as treacherous and unpredictable as the Seven Kingdoms themselves, and all the more powerful for its refusal to offer easy answers. Chapter 4, From Idea to Saga. The spark that would eventually ignite the sprawling world of A Song of Ice and Fire began, as many great stories do, with a single scene. It was 1991, and George R.R. Martin was working on a science fiction novel called Avalon when, seemingly out of nowhere, an image appeared in his mind, a young boy climbing a tower and witnessing something he was never meant to see. The boy became Bran Stark, the moment became the first chapter of a new story, and Martin soon found himself abandoning his other projects to explore the world that was rapidly taking shape around that vision. He did not yet know the full scope of what he was building, only that it was bigger, deeper, and more alive than anything he had attempted before. What began as a writing detour soon grew into an obsession, one that would consume decades of his life and redefine modern fantasy. At first, Martin imagined the tale as a trilogy, a contained epic with a beginning, middle, and end. The first volume would introduce the political struggles of Westeros and end with the outbreak of civil war. The second would follow the escalating conflict, and the third would culminate in the climactic battle between humanity and the supernatural forces stirring beyond the wall. But the deeper he ventured into the world he was creating, the less possible that structure became. New characters demanded to be written. New storylines emerged that could not be resolved quickly. Minor references evolved into major plot lines. The narrative grew too large to be contained within 3 books, then 5, and eventually Martin accepted that the story would take as many volumes as it needed to tell itself properly. He famously likened his approach to that of a gardener rather than an architect, planting seeds without knowing exactly how they would grow, then nurturing them as they twisted and spread in unexpected directions. This organic method of storytelling was both a strength and a source of challenge. It allowed Martin's characters to develop naturally, their decisions shaping the narrative rather than the reverse. Jon Snow's transformation from a peripheral figure to one of the series' central protagonists, for instance, was not something Martin planned from the outset, it was a result of the character's own momentum. The same was true for characters like Tyrion Lannister, whose wit and complexity pushed him to the forefront of the story despite initial expectations. This unpredictability is part of what gives A Song of Ice and Fire its depth. It feels less like a scripted tale and more like a living history unfolding before the reader's eyes. Yet this openness also created structural difficulties, with plotlines sprawling outward and timelines growing increasingly complex. The very quality that made the series feel alive also made it famously difficult to finish. The process of writing the first book, A Game of Thrones, was long and meticulous. Martin worked slowly, crafting the world with painstaking care. He invented detailed family histories, heraldry, languages, and customs. He mapped out the geography of Westeros and Essos with the same attention a historian might give to a real-world civilization. These details were not mere embellishments, they were essential to the story's realism. Martin wanted readers to feel as though they were reading about a real place, one with centuries of history behind it, shaped by countless generations before the events of the novels. This emphasis on depth and texture is part of what sets A Song of Ice and Fire apart from much of the fantasy that came before. It is not a story taking place in a static storybook realm, but a snapshot of a living world that existed long before the first page and will continue long after the last. When A Game of Thrones was finally published in 1996, it entered a literary landscape where fantasy was still largely dominated by the Tolkienian model. Epic quests, clear moral binaries, and mythic archetypes were the norm. Martin's novel offered something radically different. It was grim, grounded, and unapologetically political. It introduced a cast of characters who were deeply flawed and whose fates were often brutally realistic. There was no guarantee that good would triumph over evil, or that the protagonist would survive to the final chapter. The book's shocking ending, the death of Eddard Stark, the supposed central hero, announced that this was a story where anything could happen. That narrative unpredictability, combined with the depth of the world building and the complexity of the characters, immediately set A Song of Ice and Fire apart. The critical reception was strong, but it was the passionate response from readers that truly revealed the series' potential. Fans were drawn not only to the story itself but to the sense that they were exploring an entire world, one that invited speculation, debate, and immersion. They pored over genealogies, dissected prophecies, and debated the meaning of cryptic visions. Online communities formed to share theories and chart timelines, turning the series into a collaborative intellectual experience as much as a work of fiction. This engagement reflected the depth of Martin's creation. The more he built, the more readers wanted to explore. The success of A Game of Thrones emboldened Martin to expand his vision even further. A clash of kings and a storm of swords deepened the political complexity and heightened the stakes, culminating in shocking events like the Red Wedding that cemented the series' reputation for ruthless storytelling. With each new book, the scope widened, encompassing not just Westeros but the vast and varied lands across the Narrow Sea, with their own cultures, religions, and conflicts. The series evolved from a dynastic power struggle into a sweeping meditation on history itself, on how empires rise and fall, how legends are born, and how the past shapes the present in ways people barely understand. As the narrative expanded, so too did Martin's ambitions. The others, who had loomed as distant threats in the early books, began to take on greater significance, their re-emergence hinting at deeper mythological forces at work. Daenerys' journey, once a subplot, became a parallel epic exploring themes of liberation, tyranny, and destiny. Prophecies, ancient histories, and forgotten mysteries intertwined with the political narrative, enriching the series with layers of meaning and possibility. The story was no longer just about who would sit on the Iron Throne, it was about the survival of humanity itself, about the cyclical nature of history, and about the enduring conflict between fire and ice, chaos and order, change and tradition, life and death. The expansion of the series brought challenges of its own. The sheer size of the narrative made it increasingly difficult to manage, and publication delays became a defining feature of the series' later years. Martin's perfectionism, his insistence on maintaining the story's complexity and coherence, often clashed with the expectations of fans eager for the next installment. Yet even as the wait grew longer, anticipation only deepened, a testament to the power of the world he had created. Readers were not merely following a story, they were invested in a living, evolving mythos that had captured their imaginations in a way few modern works of fiction could. The transformation of A Song of Ice and Fire from a single idea into a global phenomenon is itself a story about the nature of storytelling. It shows how a narrative can evolve beyond its original intent, how characters can take on lives of their own, and how a fictional world can grow so vast and intricate that it feels indistinguishable from reality. Martin began with the image of a boy climbing a tower, and from that image he built a universe, one that explores the full spectrum of human ambition and failure, love and hatred, hope and despair. The journey from idea to saga is not just the story of a writer's creative process, it is the story of how fiction, when crafted with depth and honesty, can transcend the page and become part of the cultural fabric itself. By the time the fourth and fifth books, A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons, were released, A Song of Ice and Fire had grown far beyond what Martin had first envisioned. It was no longer simply a fantasy series, it was a cultural event, a subject of academic study, and a shared language among millions of readers around the world. The story was not yet finished, and, decades later, still is not, but perhaps that is part of its power. Like history itself, it is always in motion, always unfolding, always revealing new truths. The saga began with a boy climbing a tower, but it has become something far greater, a song still being sung, its final verse yet to be written. Chapter 5: The Geography, Climate, and the Seasons. If the characters and politics of A Song of Ice and Fire are the heart and blood of Martin's creation, then its geography is the skeleton upon which everything else is built. From the frozen, haunted wilderness beyond the wall to the shimmering spires of distant cities across the narrow sea, the world of ice and fire is as much a character as any human figure within it. Its landscapes shape its peoples, its climates forge their cultures, and its natural boundaries define the contours of its conflicts. Martin understood that to create a world that felt real, not merely a backdrop for story but a living, breathing stage, he needed to give it depth, history, and logic. Geography, in this sense, is not passive scenery. It is destiny. Westeros, the western continent and primary setting for much of the saga, stretches from the icy tundras of the far north to the sun-baked deserts of Dawn in the south. It is roughly the size of South America, and its vastness is central to the narrative's realism. Power does not move easily across such distances. Armies take months to march from one end of the continent to the other, supply lines strain and break, and news travels slowly, if at all. The physical expanse of Westeros shapes its political landscape, encouraging regional identities and rivalries. The proud, tradition-bound north, with its harsh winters and vast empty spaces, produces a people who are stoic, insular, and fiercely loyal to their ancient ways. The Reach, blessed with fertile fields and gentle weather, is the breadbasket of the realm and home to a culture that values chivalry, pageantry, and the soft power of alliances. Dawn, isolated by mountains and desert, has developed customs and laws that diverge sharply from the rest of the Seven Kingdoms, reflecting both its independence and its long history of resisting conquest. Even the capital city, King's Landing, owes much of its character to geography. Perched on the eastern coast and overlooking Blackwater Bay, it is a nexus of trade and political intrigue. Its strategic location made it the natural seat of royal power, but it also made it vulnerable to invasion from the sea, to siege by land, and to the volatile energy of a growing urban population. The geography of Westeros does not merely serve as a setting for events, it actively shapes them. Battles are won or lost based on terrain. Alliances form around shared geographic interests. Whole identities, Northern, Riverlander, Ironborn, are born from the land itself. Beyond the familiar borders of Westeros lies Essos, a continent even larger and more diverse. If Westeros is a study in feudal fragmentation, Essos is a canvas of imperial ambition, cultural collision, and historical memory. Its western edge is dominated by the free cities, independent city-states reminiscent of Renaissance Italy or the Hanseatic League, where commerce and politics are deeply intertwined. Farther east, the grasslands of the Dothraki Sea stretch endlessly under the sky, home to nomadic horse lords whose mobility and martial prowess make them both feared and misunderstood by sedentary civilizations. Beyond them lie ancient and mysterious realms like Et, Sana, and Ashai. Places that exist on the fringes of the known world, half real and half legend, their histories as old as civilization itself. The presence of these distant lands enriches the story's texture, even when the main action never reaches them. They remind the reader that Westeros is not the center of the universe, merely one part of a larger, more complex world. They also provide a sense of historical depth, the rise and fall of Valyria, the expansion of the Rhoynar, the mysteries of the Shadowlands. All of these shape the present political and cultural landscape even if they unfold centuries before the events of the novels. In this way, geography becomes a kind of silent narrator, telling stories that exist beneath and beyond the main narrative. One of the most distinctive and unsettling features of Martin's world is its irregular climate, particularly the unpredictable lengths of its seasons. Summers and winters can last for years or even decades, and their arrival and departure are often impossible to predict. This is more than a quirk of world-building, it is a fundamental force shaping life and history. In Westeros, the phrase "winter is coming" is not just a warning, it is a worldview. The long winters foster a culture of caution and resilience, teaching people to prepare for hardship even in times of abundance. They also introduce a sense of fatalism and cyclical inevitability to the narrative. Just as no one can control the seasons, no one can truly master history. Periods of peace and prosperity inevitably give way to chaos and destruction, and the wise know that stability is always temporary. The erratic seasons also serve as a metaphor for the broader themes of the series. Just as the characters cannot control the climate, they cannot fully control the tides of history or the consequences of their actions. Winter is the great equalizer, indifferent to wealth, power, or bloodline. It is a reminder that nature, like fate, exists beyond the reach of human ambition. And in the context of the story, it also carries a deeper narrative weight. The coming winter is not merely a meteorological event but a harbinger of existential threat, the return of the others, the re-emergence of ancient powers, and the collapse of the fragile order upon which human civilization depends. The landscapes of A Song of Ice and Fire also play a crucial role in shaping the series' tone and mood. The icy vastness beyond the wall is not just a location, it is an embodiment of the unknown and the primal forces that lie beyond human comprehension. The wall itself, an 800-foot barrier of ice stretching for hundreds of miles, is both a literal fortification and a symbol of humanity's attempt to hold back the dark. Ness. Across the sea, the smoking ruins of Valyria stand as a monument to hubris and catastrophe, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power. Even smaller details, the boggy swamps of the Neck, the windswept cliffs of the Iron Islands, the sun-drenched water gardens of Dawn, serve to anchor the story in a sense of place, making each chapter feel grounded in a tangible reality. Martin's meticulous attention to geography is not just a matter of verisimilitude, it is central to his larger project of grounding fantasy in realism. In many fantasy worlds, geography is a static backdrop, a stage upon which characters act without being shaped by their environment. In A Song of Ice and Fire, geography is active, dynamic, and consequential. It shapes politics, influences culture, dictates military strategy, and even informs religion and philosophy. It is no accident that the faith of the Seven flourishes in the fertile south while the old gods endure in the ancient forests of the north, or that the seafaring Ironborn revere a drowned god while the horse-riding Dothraki worship the great stallion. Geography and belief are intertwined, each reflecting and reinforcing the other. This attention to the physical world is one of the reasons Martin's universe feels so immersive. Readers do not simply follow characters from place to place, they come to understand how those places shape the characters themselves. The harshness of the North explains the stark stoicism. The opulence of the Reach explains the Tyrell's refinement. The desolation of Slaver's Bay explains both the cruelty of its masters and the desperation of its slaves. Each landscape tells a story, and together they form a vast, interconnected narrative that is as compelling as any individual plot line. By treating geography as more than scenery, Martin accomplishes something that few fantasy authors achieve: he makes his world feel inevitable. The struggles over power, the rise and fall of kingdoms, the conflicts between cultures, all of them are rooted in the land itself. They are not arbitrary or purely character-driven, they are the natural consequences of history unfolding across a physical landscape. And just as geography shapes history in the real world, from the rivers that nurtured ancient civilizations to the mountains that defined their borders, so too does it shape the fate of Westeros and beyond. In this way, the land becomes more than a setting. It becomes the silent architect of destiny, the canvas upon which the Song of Ice and Fire is written. Chapter 6: Houses, Heraldry, and Bloodlines. In the brutal, intricate world of A Song of Ice and Fire, power is not held by individuals alone, it is embedded in names, legacies, and bloodlines that stretch back centuries. Martin's depiction of noble houses is more than just a narrative device to organize alliances and rivalries, it is a fundamental part of how his world works. Lineage is the currency of legitimacy, banners are weapons as potent as swords, and ancestry can be both a source of strength and a chain that binds. In a realm where power is as fleeting as the seasons, the great houses of Westeros stand as monuments to continuity, tradition, and ambition. Yet they are also fragile, vulnerable to decay, betrayal, and the slow erosion of time. At the heart of this system are the great houses: Stark, Lannister, Targaryen, Baratheon, Greyjoy, Tyrell, Arryn, Martell, and Tully, each of them a pillar of the Seven Kingdoms, each embodying a distinct history, culture, and philosophy. They are not merely families but institutions, their names imbued with centuries of myth and meaning. Their sigils and words are more than symbols, they are ideological statements. The Stark's direwolf and their motto, "Winter is coming," reflect a worldview shaped by the harsh realities of the North, a culture of duty, endurance, and vigilance. The Lannisters' golden lion and their unofficial credo, "A Lannister always pays his debts," reveal a family that equates wealth and power with influence and honor. The Baratheons' crowned stag embodies the restless, often reckless nature of their line, while the Greyjoys' kraken and their grim declaration, "We do not sow," encapsulate a culture built on raiding, defiance, and disdain for the ways of the mainland. These sigils and words function almost like brands, easily recognizable and loaded with meaning, but they also serve as political tools. They communicate power, values, and expectations, shaping how others perceive the house and how the house perceives itself. This is not just true in fiction. In medieval Europe, coats of arms and family mottos performed a similar function, signaling lineage and legitimacy to allies and enemies alike. Martin uses heraldry in precisely this way, weaving it deeply into the political and cultural fabric of his world. A banner unfurled on the battlefield can rally armies or strike fear into enemies. A marriage between houses can unite sigils and words, forging new alliances and reshaping political landscapes. Yet Martin is careful to show that the power of these houses does not lie solely in their symbols. It is also rooted in the bloodlines that connect them to the past, and in a world obsessed with inheritance, blood is often more powerful than steel. Questions of legitimacy drive many of the series' most consequential conflicts. The War of the Five Kings, for example, begins with a dispute over the paternity of Cersei Lannister's children and the validity of their claim to the Iron Throne. The tension between bastardy and legitimacy, between bloodline and merit, is a recurring theme that cuts across the narrative. Jon Snow's arc, defined by his status as a bastard of House Stark and his eventual revelation as a potential heir to the Targaryen line, is perhaps the most striking example of how lineage can both limit and liberate a character. The weight of ancestry is not only political but psychological. Many characters in A Song of Ice and Fire are defined, and often trapped, by the legacies of their forebears. Tywin Lannister's ruthless pursuit of power is driven in part by his obsession with preserving the glory of House Lannister, which he believes his father tarnished. Stannis Baratheon's rigid sense of duty stems from a belief that the Baratheon name must be upheld at all costs. Daenerys Targaryen's entire identity is shaped by the history of her house, a dynasty that once ruled the known world but was brought low by rebellion and betrayal. She is haunted as much by the ghosts of her ancestors as she is inspired by their triumphs. In this way, Martin explores how family can be both a source of strength and a source of profound internal conflict. But while noble houses are repositories of power, they are also inherently unstable. Their fortunes rise and fall with the tides of war, the whims of fate, and the ambitions of individuals. Great dynasties crumble because of a single miscalculation or a single weak heir. House Targaryen, once unassailable, is scattered and broken after Robert's rebellion. House Stark, the ancient wardens of the North, is brought to the brink of extinction through betrayal and war. Even the mighty Lannisters, at the height of their power, find their legacy threatened by internal division and external enemies. Martin's portrayal of noble houses as simultaneously powerful and precarious reflects the historical reality of aristocratic rule, that no matter how ancient or glorious a lineage, it is always vulnerable to time, ambition, and chance. The political utility of marriage alliances further underscores the importance of bloodlines. In Westeros, marriage is rarely about love, it is about consolidating power, forging alliances, and producing heirs. The Tyrells' strategic marriages expand their influence far beyond the Reach. The Frys, despite their lowly origins, leverage their vast numbers to become indispensable to any faction seeking control of the Riverlands. Even characters like Petter Baelish, who lack noble lineage, recognize that bloodlines can be manipulated, that a well-placed marriage can elevate a minor house to greatness or plunge a great one into ruin. These dynamics mirror the political marriages of medieval Europe, where unions were often tools of diplomacy and conquest. Martin also uses the concept of bastardy to explore the fragility and arbitrariness of social hierarchies. Bastards, no matter their talents or virtues, are stigmatized and excluded from inheritance, their blood deemed impure by the laws of men. Yet they often embody the contradictions of the system more clearly than anyone else. Jon Snow, Gendry, Ramsay Bolton, and Illyria Sand's children each illustrate different responses to their illegitimacy, from quiet resignation to furious rebellion. Their existence challenges the idea that nobility is an inherent quality rather than a social construct, and their struggles reveal the often hypocritical nature of a society that worships bloodline while disregarding the individual. What emerges from all of this is a nuanced portrait of power, one that is as much about perception and inheritance as it is about armies and gold. Noble houses in A Song of Ice and Fire are not simply backdrops for the story, they are engines that drive it. They embody the tension between continuity and change, between tradition and ambition, between the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. They remind us that power is not just something you seize, it is something you inherit, maintain, and pass on, often at great cost. The obsession with bloodlines and legacy that runs through Martin's world is not just a reflection of medieval history, it is a commentary on human nature itself. We define ourselves by the families we are born into, the names we carry, and the histories we inherit. We build monuments to our ancestors, wage wars to defend their honor, and shape our identities around stories written long before we were born. But as Martin's saga shows, the past is not a stable foundation. It is a shifting ground, one that can crumble beneath our feet at any moment. And when it does, the banners that once inspired fear and reverence may end up hanging over the ruins of what was once a great house, fluttering in the cold wind as a reminder that no name, no matter how storied, is immune to the passage of time. Chapter 7: Faiths, Prophecies, and the Spiritual Landscape. Power in Westeros is not measured solely in armies, titles, or gold. It is also woven into the invisible threads of faith, belief, and prophecy, forces that shape societies, justify rulers, and inspire both noble sacrifice and monstrous cruelty. In George R.R. Martin's world, religion is not a mere backdrop to the political and military struggles of his characters, it is an active agent in the story, a vital source of meaning and conflict that rivals even the Iron Throne itself in its influence over human behavior. Faith, in all its diverse forms, serves as a lens through which the people of this world understand their place in the universe, and as a tool through which the powerful seek to control them. The dominant faith in Westeros is the Faith of the Seven, a religion that resembles the medieval Catholic Church both in structure and in societal influence. Worshippers venerate 7 aspects of a single god: the father, mother, warrior, maiden, smith, crone, and stranger, each representing a facet of the divine and a dimension of human experience. This polytheistic monotheism reflects a worldview that seeks order and harmony in the chaos of life, offering comfort through ritual and moral guidance. The faith wields immense power, not only as a source of spiritual authority but also as a political institution. Its septs dot the landscape, its septons and scepters serve as moral arbiters, and its high septon, the equivalent of a pope, commands reverence and fear. But like its real-world counterparts, the faith's influence is not always benign. It has been used to legitimize kings and condemn heretics, to crown rulers and depose them. The Faith Militant, a militant order of warrior priests revived under the High Sparrow, demonstrates how religion can become a weapon when fused with populist fervor. The Faith's alliance with Cersei Lannister, intended to secure her hold on power, ultimately turns against her, a stark reminder of how religious movements, once unleashed, can grow beyond the control of those who sought to use them. Through the Faith of the Seven, Martin explores the dual nature of organized religion, It can bind societies together with shared values and rituals, but it can also fracture them with dogma, intolerance, and zealotry. Older and more primal than the faith of the Seven is the worship of the old gods of the forest, a belief system still practiced in the north and beyond the wall. Unlike the structured hierarchy and elaborate rituals of the faith, the old gods are worshipped in sacred groves beneath ancient weirwood trees, their white bark carved with silent, watchful faces. This religion is animistic, rooted in nature and ancestral memory. It lacks priests, temples, or scripture. Its power lies in its intimacy and its deep connection to the land. The old gods embody the North's values, endurance, tradition, and respect for forces beyond human control. Their worshippers do not seek to master the world but to live within it, acknowledging the mysteries that lie beyond human understanding. The stark contrast between the faith of the Seven and the old gods reflects a deeper cultural divide within Westeros, one between the South's structured, hierarchical society and the North's older, more instinctive way of life. It also raises questions about the nature of divinity itself. Are the old gods truly gods, or are they something older and stranger, perhaps the lingering spirits of the children of the forest, or echoes of the weirwoods themselves? Martin leaves these questions deliberately ambiguous, inviting readers to ponder the nature of faith and the human tendency to seek meaning in the unknown. Across the narrow sea, religion takes on even more diverse and often more volatile forms. The Lord of Light, Ahlor, is worshipped as a singular, omnipotent deity locked in eternal struggle with the Great Other, a god of darkness and cold. This dualistic faith, practiced widely in Essos and brought to Westeros by figures like Melisandre, introduces an apocalyptic worldview that stands in sharp contrast to the more measured faiths of Westeros. Its priests perform miracles, resurrecting the dead, conjuring visions, and wielding fire as a divine instrument, yet their power is as terrifying as it is awe-inspiring. The faith's emphasis on prophecy and destiny gives it a compelling allure but also a dangerous inflexibility. Its followers see the world in absolutes, light versus dark, salvation versus damnation, a perspective that can justify terrible acts in the name of a supposedly higher purpose. The worship of Ahlor also brings one of the series' most potent narrative devices to the forefront, prophecy. From Azor Ahai, the prophesied hero reborn to save the world from darkness, to the prince that was promised, whose coming is said to bring salvation, prophecy weaves through the series like a thread of fire, guiding decisions, shaping destinies, and sowing chaos. Yet Martin deliberately complicates the trope of prophecy, refusing to present it as straightforward truth. Prophecies are often vague, contradictory, and open to interpretation. They inspire hope and fanaticism in equal measure. Characters who cling too tightly to them, like Melisandre, who misinterprets her visions with devastating consequences, often find themselves blinded to reality. In this way, prophecy becomes a mirror for human belief itself, powerful and seductive, but also prone to error and manipulation. Other faiths in Martin's world further enrich this spiritual tapestry. The drowned god of the Ironborn, who demands death and rebirth through water, reflects a culture shaped by the sea and defined by conquest. The many-faced god, worshipped by the faceless men in Bravos, offers a radically different theology, one that sees death as the ultimate mercy and the final equality. Even the ancient Valyrians, whose dragons once dominated the known world, practiced blood magic and sorcery that blurred the line between religion and science. These diverse beliefs remind us that religion, and, perhaps most importantly, it shapes the narratives through which people understand their own lives. Prophecy, too, becomes a commentary on human nature. We are drawn to patterns, to stories that promise purpose amid chaos. We cling to visions of the future because they make the uncertainty of the present bearable. Yet Martin reminds us that prophecy is not destiny. It is filtered through human interpretation, shaped by desire, and often fulfilled in ways no one expects. In the end, it is not the gods or the prophecies that decide the fate of Westeros, it is the choices people make, the beliefs they cling to, and the actions they take in pursuit of meaning. This intricate web of faith and prophecy enriches A Song of Ice and Fire in ways few fantasy series attempt. It makes the world feel real not just politically and geographically, but spiritually. It reflects the complexity of human belief, our capacity for devotion and doubt, for transcendence and fanaticism. And it underscores one of Martin's most enduring themes, that the stories we tell about the divine, like the histories we write about ourselves, are shaped as much by who we are as by whatever truths may lie beyond our understanding. Chapter 8: Myths, Memory, and Lost Empires. Beneath the political scheming, dynastic conflicts, and religious zeal that animate the present-day story of A Song of Ice and Fire lies an even deeper layer of narrative, one woven from myth, legend, and the long-forgotten ages of the world. It is a history that stretches back thousands of years, its stories half-remembered, distorted, and mythologized over centuries. It is also one of the most striking ways in which George R.R. Martin transforms his fictional universe into something that feels truly real. Like the real world, Westeros and Essos are not blank slates upon which events unfold. They are lands haunted by the weight of forgotten empires, ancient wars, and half-understood truths. The present is never free of the past, it is shaped and haunted by it, sometimes in ways its inhabitants scarcely realize. In Martin's world, myth and history are often indistinguishable, and that ambiguity is deliberate. The Age of Heroes, a distant era thousands of years before the events of the books, is full of legendary figures whose exploits straddle the line between fact and fable. Names like Bran the Builder, Lan the Clever, and Garth Greenhand loom large in the collective memory of Westeros, their deeds foundational to the identities of noble houses and entire regions. Yet the stories surrounding T.H.M. are inconsistent, contradictory, and often fantastical. Did Bran truly build the wall and Winterfell, or is his name a convenient vessel for the achievements of many forgotten builders? Did Lan the Clever truly trick House Casterly out of their ancestral seat with cunning words, or was the reality far bloodier? Martin intentionally leaves these questions unresolved, mirroring the way real myths evolve over time, blending historical events with embellishment until the truth is impossible to recover. The origins of the world's oldest conflicts are similarly shrouded in myth. The Long Night, a cataclysmic winter that blanketed the world in darkness and heralded the arrival of the White Walkers, is treated by most characters as distant legend, yet its legacy permeates the series. The Night's Watch, the Wall, and the deep-seated northern fear of what lies beyond it all stem from this half-remembered apocalypse. In the telling, the Long Night becomes more than a historical event, it is a mythic pattern, a story about humanity's cyclical confrontation with forces beyond its control. It is both a warning and a prophecy, reminding the living that history is not a straight line but a circle, and that the ancient evils once thought vanquished may return again. Just as Westeros is shaped by forgotten ages, Essos is defined by the ruins of empires that once dominated the world. Chief among them is Valyria, the fabled Dragon Lord's empire whose power was unmatched for centuries. With their dragons and advanced knowledge of magic, the Valyrians built roads, raised cities, and forged an empire that stretched across continents. But their ambition proved their undoing. The doom of Valyria, a cataclysm of fire and earth that destroyed the freehold in a single day, remains one of the great mysteries of Martin's world. Was it a natural disaster? A magical catastrophe? A punishment from the gods? No one knows for certain, and that uncertainty lends the event a mythic quality. Valyria's fall transformed the political landscape of Essos and left behind a legacy of ruins, artifacts, and fearful reverence, a cautionary tale about hubris and the impermanence of even the greatest powers. Other lost civilizations add further depth and texture to the setting. The Rhoynar, a riverine people defeated by Valyria, left their mark on the Dornish through migration and cultural exchange, shaping laws, customs, and even architecture. The Giscari Empire, long since destroyed, still casts a shadow over Slavers Bay, where the legacy of its brutal slave economy endures. Far to the east, places like Yi-Ti, Lung, and Ashai exist on the edge of myth, realms with history so ancient and opaque that even the most learned maesters know little about them. These remnants of forgotten empires function much as the Roman, Babylonian, or Mayan civilizations do in our own world, as echoes of past greatness that continue to influence the present in subtle, far-reaching ways. The presence of these ancient powers serves several purposes within Martin's larger narrative. On a practical level, they provide historical context that explains the political and cultural landscape of the present. The rivalries between cities, the distribution of power, and even the spread of religions are often rooted in events that took place centuries or millennia earlier. On a thematic level, they remind readers that the story they are reading is just one chapter in a much longer saga. Civilizations rise and fall, beliefs change, and knowledge is lost, and yet the same fundamental struggles for power, identity, and survival repeat again and again. The past, in Martin's world, is not dead. It is a living force that shapes the choices and destinies of those who come after. Magic itself, often treated with skepticism or fear by the characters, is deeply entwined with this sense of historical depth. In the early books, magic is believed to have largely faded from the world. A relic of a bygone age. Dragons are extinct, prophecies forgotten, and the others dismissed as nursery tales. But as the series progresses, magic begins to return, heralded by the birth of Daenerys' dragons and the re-emergence of supernatural forces in the far north. This resurgence mirrors the reawakening of forgotten histories, suggesting that the past is never truly gone but lies dormant, waiting to reassert itself. Magic, in this sense, is less a fantastical element than a metaphor for memory, suppressed, dismissed, but ultimately irrepressible. Memory itself is a recurring motif in A Song of Ice and Fire. It shapes identities, legitimizes claims, and drives characters to action. Houses invoke the deeds of their ancestors to justify their power. Maesters compile chronicles to impose order on a chaotic past. Even prophecies, often dismissed as superstition, are ultimately attempts to link the present to a deeper historical narrative. Yet memory is also unreliable, distorted by time, bias, and self-interest. The official histories written in Old Town often contradict the oral traditions of the North or the fragmented tales of the free folk. This tension between remembered and forgotten, fact and legend, is at the heart of Martin's exploration of history itself. It is not a stable record but a contested terrain, one that can be manipulated, rewritten, or erased. In the end, the myths and lost empires of A Song of Ice and Fire serve a purpose beyond world-building. They ground the story in a sense of time and continuity that few fantasy worlds achieve. They remind readers, and characters, that the present is built atop the ruins of the past, and that the future will, in turn, be built upon the ruins of the present. They also reinforce one of Martin's most enduring themes, that power, no matter how absolute it seems, is transient. Even the mightiest empires crumble, the most feared enemies fade into legend, and the most revered heroes become little more than names in an old book. Yet their stories endure, shaping the world long after the people who lived them are gone. This is the paradox of history as Martin presents it, it is both ephemeral and eternal. Kingdoms fall, knowledge is lost, and names are forgotten, but the forces that drive human ambition, fear, and hope remain unchanged. The myths of yesterday become the realities of today, and the realities of today will one day be the myths of tomorrow. In this cyclical dance of memory and forgetting, Martin finds a truth deeper than any prophecy, that the past is never truly past. It is always with us, shaping who we are, what we believe, and how we fight for the future. By now, the tapestry of A Song of Ice and Fire has begun to reveal itself in all its intricacy. We have traced the roots of George R.R. Martin's creation back to its origins, to the writer's childhood fascination with history and storytelling, to the turbulent politics and wars of the real world that shaped his worldview, and to the singular creative vision that dared to subvert the conventions of the fantasy genre. We have followed the spark of an idea, a boy climbing a tower and glimpsing a dangerous truth, as it grew into a saga of extraordinary scale and complexity, a world so richly imagined that it feels less like fiction and more like a chronicle of a distant, forgotten age. Along the way, we have peeled back the layers that make this series not merely a story, but a cultural phenomenon. We have seen how Martin uses moral ambiguity and historical realism to reject simple narratives of good and evil, crafting instead a mirror that reflects the messy, contradictory nature of human behavior. We have examined the physical world itself, a living, breathing geography whose climates, distances, and landscapes shape the destinies of those who inhabit it. We have explored the noble houses and bloodlines that define the power structures of Westeros, seeing how history, heraldry, and inheritance intertwine to shape politics and identity. And we have delved into the faiths and prophecies that offer meaning to a world in turmoil, and that, like their real-world counterparts, can both uplift and destroy. Perhaps most revealing of all, we have looked beyond the present to the vast expanse of the past, to the myths, legends, and lost empires whose echoes continue to shape the living world. In Martin's hands, history is not static but cyclical. It is a living force that haunts the present, a ghost that guides, warns, and manipulates those who think themselves free from its grasp. The doom of Valyria, the memory of the long night, the whispered promises of ancient prophecies, all are reminders that the world of A Song of Ice and Fire is built upon the bones of what came before. Taken together, these threads form more than just a setting for a fantasy epic. They form a reflection, a study of how societies rise and fall, how beliefs evolve, how people struggle for meaning in a world that is often indifferent to their hopes. Martin's genius lies not simply in inventing a fictional realm, but in constructing one that feels as if it has always existed. The people of Westeros and Essos are not actors on a stage, they are heirs to forgotten ages, prisoners of tradition, and architects of futures they may never see. And yet, for all that we have uncovered, we have only scratched the surface. The deeper story, the one that elevates A Song of Ice and Fire from a remarkable work of world-building to a profound meditation on humanity, still lies ahead. It is a story written not in maps or family trees, but in people, their ambitions and betrayals, their fears and desires, their triumphs and failures. It is a story about power. What it is, how it is gained, how it corrupts, and how it slips from grasp just when it seems most secure. It is a story about identity, how individuals define themselves in a world that constantly seeks to define them. And it is a story about the collision of ideals and reality, about what happens when morality, loyalty, and love meet the brutal logic of survival. In the chapters ahead, we will descend from the lofty heights of myth and history into the very heart of the narrative, the people who live it. We will walk beside kings and queens as they fight for thrones, stand in the shadows with schemers and spies as they weave their plots, and peer into the minds of heroes and villains alike to understand the forces that drive them. We will analyze the archetypes that shape their stories and the psychological truths that make them resonate with readers around the world. And beyond that, we will follow the saga beyond the page, exploring how A Song of Ice and Fire leapt from literature to television, how it conquered global culture, and how it changed the landscape of storytelling itself. The world we have studied is vast and ancient, but its influence is not confined to its fictional borders. It extends into our own, shaping how we tell stories, how we consume them, and how we see ourselves reflected in them. The first act of our journey has been about building the world, understanding the soil from which this saga grew. The second will be about living within it, experiencing the storm of human ambition, passion, and tragedy that defines it. For in the end, the magic of A Song of Ice and Fire is not only in the dragons or the battles or the ancient prophecies. It is in the people, flawed, brilliant, desperate, and achingly human, who inhabit this world and make it come alive. The stage is set. The pieces are in motion. The past is whispering, the present is burning, and the future looms on the horizon like a gathering storm. The story is ready to turn inward, to explore the hearts and minds that beat beneath the banners, the crowns, and the blades. And as we step into the next part of our journey, we will discover that the greatest battles in Martin's world are not fought with swords or dragons, but within the souls of those who dare to shape history. Chapter 9: Power, Politics, and the Game of Thrones. If the mythic past is the foundation upon which A Song of Ice and Fire is built, and the world itself its stage, then politics, ruthless, shifting, and endlessly complex, is the story's engine. At its core, Martin's saga is not about dragons or magic or prophecy, though all of these elements enrich it. It is about power, how it is sought, how it is wielded, how it corrupts, and how it slips through the fingers of those who believe they have secured it. The wars, betrayals, and uneasy alliances that drive the plot are not arbitrary conflicts inserted for drama's sake. They are the inevitable consequence of competing ambitions colliding in a system where power is both the ultimate prize and the most precarious possession. From the very first pages of A Game of Thrones, we are introduced to a political order that is already rotting from within. The Iron Throne, that jagged, uncomfortable symbol forged from the swords of conquered foes, is not merely a seat of rule. It is a metaphor for the nature of power itself, alluring, dangerous, and impossible to rest upon without bleeding. King Robert Baratheon may wear the crown, but his grip on the realm is tenuous. The great houses jostle for influence, the crown's coffers are empty, and old grudges simmer beneath a fragile peace. Into this volatile mix steps Eddard Stark, a man whose honor blinds him to the game he has entered, a game with no rules, where morality is a liability and survival often depends on one's willingness to betray. The so-called Game of Thrones is, at its essence, a struggle for legitimacy and control. It is fought not only with swords and armies but with marriages, letters, secrets, and lies. Lords and ladies maneuver like chess pieces, forging alliances that will later be broken, promising loyalty while plotting treachery. Every move is calculated, every gesture potentially fatal. And yet, what makes Martin's portrayal so compelling is its fidelity to reality. Power is not static, it is dynamic, constantly shifting as circumstances change. Today's victor is tomorrow's exile. Yesterday's loyal vassal becomes today's usurper. There are no permanent allies, no eternal enemies, only interests that align or diverge in the moment. The War of the Five Kings, perhaps the most dramatic manifestation of this struggle, illustrates the destructive nature of unchecked ambition. What begins as a dispute over succession spirals into a continent-spanning conflict that claims tens of thousands of lives. Each claimant believes his cause just. Stannis Baratheon insists on the sanctity of lawful inheritance. Renly seeks to rule through charisma and popularity. Robb Stark fights for northern independence. Balon Greyjoy dreams of resurrecting an ancient empire of Reavers. And Joffrey Baratheon, propped up by the machinations of his mother and grandfather, clings to a throne built on lies. None of them achieves the outcome they desire. Some are killed, others defeated, and all are diminished by the relentless logic of the struggle they helped unleash. It is in this political maelstrom that Martin's greatest thematic preoccupations emerge. One of the most persistent is the corrupting nature of power, not only for those who wield it, but for those who pursue it. Cersei Lannister, who begins as a secondary figure seeking influence through her children, gradually becomes consumed by paranoia and cruelty as her grip tightens. Stannis, once a man of duty, sacrifices his daughter to the flames in the belief that destiny demands it. Even Daenerys Targaryen, whose early chapters cast her as a liberator and breaker of chains, faces the temptation of tyranny as she learns how intoxicating, and how necessary, power can be. In Martin's world, few characters are untouched by the corrosive effects of authority. The pursuit of power changes them, often irrevocably, and those who achieve it find that holding it is far more difficult than seizing it. Yet the story also challenges the simplistic notion that power is inherently evil. It is, rather, a force, one that can be used to protect or destroy, to liberate or enslave. The question Martin asks, again and again, is not whether power is good or bad, but who wields it, why, and to what end. Tyrion Lannister, for example, uses his influence to temper the cruelty of his nephew's reign and to institute reforms that benefit the small folk. Jon Snow, elevated to Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, learns that leadership often requires compromise, sacrifice, and the willingness to make decisions that will never be universally praised. Power, in Martin's telling, is not a monolith. It is a spectrum of choices and consequences, a constant negotiation between idealism and pragmatism. The fragility of legitimacy is another recurring theme. In a world obsessed with bloodlines and birthright, Martin repeatedly shows how thin the veneer of authority truly is. The Targaryens ruled Westeros for nearly 3 centuries, claiming divine right through their dragons and Valyrian blood, yet they fell to a rebellion led by men with no greater claim than their strength and popularity. Robert Baratheon's reign is likewise founded not on legal succession but on victory in war. Even the Night's Watch, sworn to defend the realm from threats beyond the wall, is plagued by internal factionalism and challenges to its authority. Power, Martin reminds us, is rarely as secure as it appears. It is legitimized by perception, upheld by consent, and vulnerable to collapse when either falters. If there is one figure who embodies the essence of the game itself, it is Petyr Baelish, Littlefinger, a man of no noble birth who ascends through cunning, manipulation, and an almost Machiavellian understanding of power's true nature. To Littlefinger, power is not a birthright or a divine mandate, it is an illusion sustained by belief and fear. His famous declaration, "Chaos is a ladder," encapsulates the brutal logic of Martin's political world. Chaos, far from being a threat, is an opportunity. Where others see disorder and danger, the ambitious see the chance to climb. This philosophy stands in stark contrast to that of Varys, the spider, whose manipulations are driven not by self-interest but by a genuine desire for stability and the common good. The rivalry between these two men represents two competing visions of power, one as an end in itself, the other as a means to a higher purpose. The common people, the small folk, are often forgotten in these high-stakes games, yet their suffering is the most consistent consequence of elite ambition. Fields are burned, villages razed, and thousands slaughtered while lords debate claims and banners. Martin's decision to occasionally shift perspective to characters far removed from the centers of power, peasants, prostitutes, and common soldiers, serves as a stark reminder of who truly pays the price for political ambition. It is a critique of both feudalism and the romanticized notions of war that dominate traditional fantasy. Victory, if it comes at all, is often Pyrrhic. The wheel of power turns, but those crushed beneath it remain the same. Ultimately, the Game of Thrones is not merely a contest for a chair of swords, it is a metaphor for the human condition. It reflects the endless struggle for dominance, security, and meaning that has defined societies throughout history. It is about the seduction of control and the fear of losing it, the tension between legitimacy and force, and the fragile illusions upon which authority rests. And like the real-world politics it mirrors, from the intrigues of Renaissance courts to the revolutions of the modern era, it is rarely resolved cleanly. Victories are temporary, alliances fleeting, and peace precarious. By placing politics at the center of his narrative, Martin elevates A Song of Ice and Fire beyond the realm of fantasy and into the territory of historical tragedy. His world may have dragons and undead armies, but its deepest conflicts are recognizably human, driven by ambition, greed, ideology, and fear. It is a world where power is both everything and nothing, where the mighty rise and fall with dizzying speed, and where the game never truly ends. For in Westeros, as in our own world, the pursuit of power is not a story with a conclusion. It is the story itself. Chapter 10, Gender, Power, and the Women of Westeros. In a world as violent, hierarchical, and male-dominated as Westeros, it would be easy to assume that women are destined to exist only on the margins of power, as prizes in dynastic marriages, pawns in political games, or victims of a patriarchal order too vast to challenge. And yet, one of the most striking achievements of A Song of Ice and Fire is the way George R.R. Martin subverts those expectations. His women are not mere supporting players in a story driven by men. They are central figures, rulers, warriors, conspirators, visionaries, and survivors, who shape the course of history in ways both subtle and seismic. Through them, Martin explores the complex interplay between gender and power, showing how women navigate, manipulate, and often overturn the very systems designed to oppress them. From the moment the reader meets Cersei Lannister, it becomes clear that Martin intends to interrogate the nature of power and femininity. Cersei is a queen in a world that denies her the right to rule. Born into one of the most powerful families in Westeros, she is taught from childhood that her value lies in her beauty, her ability to marry well, and her capacity to produce heirs. Yet her ambitions far exceed the roles society has assigned her. She does not want to stand beside the throne, she wants to sit upon it. This hunger for power drives her actions throughout the series, pushing her to manipulate kings, orchestrate alliances, and eliminate rivals. But Cersei's story is also a cautionary one. Her intelligence and ruthlessness are undermined by her paranoia and arrogance, and the very system she seeks to master ultimately devours her. Through Cersei, Martin illustrates both the potential and the peril of women seeking power in a patriarchal society, how their ambitions are constrained not only by external forces but also by the psychological toll of living within them. Where Cersei represents one path, the pursuit of power through manipulation and inheritance, characters like Brienne of Tarth embody a radically different challenge to the gender norms of Westeros. Brienne defies nearly every expectation placed upon noble women. She refuses to marry, rejects traditional femininity, and instead dedicates herself to the life of a knight, a vocation from which women are explicitly excluded. Ridiculed and ostracized for her appearance and choices, she nonetheless becomes one of the most honorable and capable warriors in the series. Her story is not one of vengeance or ambition but of integrity and perseverance. In Brienne, Martin offers a portrait of female strength that is not defined by beauty, sexuality, or cunning, but by loyalty, courage, and unwavering moral purpose. Sansa Stark, by contrast, begins as the embodiment of the traditional feminine ideal. Dreaming of courtly romance and noble knights, she believes that her destiny lies in marriage and motherhood. Yet the brutal realities of court life strip away those illusions with merciless efficiency. Betrayed, abused, and manipulated, Sansa is forced to learn the harsh lessons of survival in a world that sees her as a pawn. Over time, she transforms those lessons into power. She learns how to listen, how to read people, how to play the political game without appearing to play it at all. By the later books, Sansa has become a master of subtle influence, a political player whose weapons are patience, observation, and the careful use of appearances. Her arc is one of the most compelling in the series because it demonstrates a different kind of strength, not physical might or overt rebellion, but the ability to adapt, endure, and quietly reshape the system from within. If Sansa represents evolution within the system, her younger sister Arya rejects it entirely. Arya's refusal to conform to traditional gender roles is more than rebellion, it is a survival strategy. Stripped of family, home, and identity, she forges a new path as a faceless assassin, abandoning the constraints of nobility, femininity, and even self. Her journey is one of transformation, but it also raises profound questions about identity and agency. Arya gains extraordinary power, yet she does so at the cost of her name and her past. Her story is a meditation on what it means to define oneself on one's own terms, and on the sacrifices such autonomy demands. Daenerys Targaryen's arc, meanwhile, is perhaps the most overtly political examination of female power in the series. Sold into marriage as a pawn in her brother's schemes, she begins as a victim of male ambition. But her rise from frightened girl to mother of dragons is one of the most dramatic transformations in the saga. Daenerys wields power not through deception or subtlety but through vision and force. She liberates slaves, topples regimes, and commands armies. Yet her reign is not without contradictions. Even as she seeks to end tyranny, she risks becoming a tyrant herself. Her story is a study in the complexities of revolutionary power, how it can inspire devotion and fear in equal measure, and how the line between liberation and domination can blur. Through Daenerys, Martin explores how gender intersects with leadership, and how women in power are often judged by standards fundamentally different from those applied to men. Beyond individual characters, Martin uses the broader societal structures of Westeros and Essos to examine how gender roles are constructed, enforced, and occasionally subverted. Marriage, for instance, is not merely a personal choice but a political tool, used to consolidate power, forge alliances, and secure succession. Women are often treated as property to be exchanged, their agency reduced to their capacity to bear heirs. Yet time and again, women turn this expectation on its head. Margaery Tyrell uses her marriages to climb ever closer to the throne, manipulating public opinion and wielding charm as a political weapon. Olenna Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns, uses her position as a matriarch to exercise influence behind the scenes, proving that political power can thrive in spaces where it is least expected. Martin also refuses to romanticize the oppression women face. Sexual violence, coercion, and systemic misogyny are pervasive realities in his world, just as they have been throughout much of human history. These elements are deeply uncomfortable, but they serve a narrative purpose, to show the brutality of the systems his characters inhabit and to highlight the extraordinary resilience required to survive and thrive within them. Yet even as he portrays these harsh realities, Martin gives his female characters agency. They are not defined solely by the violence inflicted upon them. They act, adapt, resist, and, in many cases, seize control of their own destinies. Through these diverse portrayals, Martin offers no single model of femininity or female power. Instead, he presents a spectrum of possibilities, each shaped by circumstance, personality, and choice. Some women challenge the system head-on, others manipulate it from within, and still others reinvent themselves entirely outside its bounds. What unites them is their refusal to be defined solely by the role society assigns them. They are mothers and queens, warriors and assassins, schemers and saints, and in their struggles, they reflect the broader human quest for agency, dignity, and self-definition. In exploring gender in such nuanced ways, A Song of Ice and Fire transcends the conventions of its genre. Fantasy, historically, has often relegated women to the sidelines, as damsels to be rescued or prizes to be won. Martin's world is different. It acknowledges the constraints of a patriarchal order but also shows the myriad ways women resist, adapt, and overcome. It examines the intersection of gender and power not as a secondary theme but as a central part of the human story. And in doing so, it reminds us that the struggle for agency, whether fought with crowns, swords, or whispered words, is one of the most enduring battles in any world, real or imagined. Chapter 11: Identity, Morality, and the Human Condition. At its deepest level, A Song of Ice and Fire is not a story about kings and dragons, nor solely about battles for power or the cycles of history. It is a story about people, flawed, conflicted, contradictory, and profoundly human. George R.R. Martin's characters are not mythic heroes destined to save the world, nor are they mustached whirling villains bent on destruction. They are, instead, mirrors held up to the human condition, reflecting the complexity of our choices, the weight of our pasts, and the moral grayness that defines real life. Through them, Martin examines questions as old as literature itself. What defines us? Are we bound by our nature, or can we become something different? And can morality exist in a world where survival often demands compromise? Identity, in Martin's world, is never static. It is a fluid, evolving thing, shaped by circumstance, choice, and the often painful collision between who we are and who we wish to be. Few characters embody this more profoundly than Jon Snow. Born a bastard and raised in the shadow of his legitimate siblings, Jon's early identity is defined by what he is not a Stark, not an heir, not truly part of the family he loves. This sense of exclusion drives his choices, leading him to the Night's Watch, where he seeks a place where birth matters less than loyalty and duty. Yet even there, his identity continues to evolve. As he rises through the ranks, he must redefine himself again, as a leader, as a negotiator, and ultimately as a man who must betray the institution he swore to serve in order to remain true to its deeper mission. Jon's arc suggests that identity is not a fixed trait but an ongoing negotiation between external labels and internal convictions. Daenerys Targaryen's story explores a different facet of identity, one shaped by legacy and destiny. As the last surviving child of a deposed dynasty, her very name is a symbol of both hope and hatred. Initially defined by her brother's ambitions, she grows into her own sense of self, embracing the mantle of queen and liberator. Yet Daenerys' identity is not without tension. She is torn between her Targaryen heritage, with all its associations of conquest, fire, and blood, and her desire to be a just and merciful ruler. Her internal struggle reflects a broader theme of the series, the challenge of reconciling the past with the future, of honoring one's origins without being enslaved by them. It is a dilemma that resonates far beyond the page, mirroring the universal human struggle to define oneself amid the competing forces of inheritance and self-determination. Tyrion Lannister, perhaps the series' most psychologically complex character, represents yet another approach to the question of identity. Mocked and reviled for his dwarfism, Tyrion is constantly forced to confront a world that refuses to see him as anything more than a joke or a monstrosity. His intellect becomes both shield and sword, a means of carving out a place for himself in a society that would otherwise discard him. But his wit, though formidable, is also a source of self-loathing. Tyrion's identity is inextricably tied to how others perceive him, and much of his journey is a struggle to assert agency over a self-image that has been defined by scorn. His arc is a powerful exploration of how external judgment shapes internal reality, and how the quest for self-worth is often waged against forces beyond our control. Morality, too, is anything but straightforward in Martin's world. Traditional fantasy often divides characters neatly into heroes and villains, each guided by clear and opposing moral codes. Martin rejects this simplicity, presenting instead a spectrum of ethical frameworks, each shaped by circumstance, perspective, and necessity. Characters commit atrocities in the name of justice, and acts of kindness emerge from unexpected places. Jaime Lannister's transformation from despised Kingslayer to sympathetic figure is emblematic of this complexity. His decision to kill King Aerys II, an act that brands him an oathbreaker, is revealed to be an act of heroism, a choice made to prevent the massacre of an entire city. Yet even this morally justified act is tainted by the personal shame and public scorn it brings. Jaime's story forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that morality is often defined not by action but by perception. This moral ambiguity permeates the series. Ned Stark's unwavering honor leads to his downfall, raising the question of whether virtue is a strength or a fatal flaw in a corrupt world. Stannis Baratheon's obsession with duty drives him to sacrifice his own daughter, forcing readers to grapple with the limits of righteousness. Sandor Clegane, a brutal and cynical killer, nonetheless shows flashes of compassion and decency that complicate his villainous facade. Even the monstrous Ramsay Bolton and Gregor Clegane, while irredeemable in their cruelty, are products of a violent system that rewards brutality. Through these characters, Martin challenges us to abandon simplistic notions of good and evil and to engage with morality as it exists in reality, messy, situational, and deeply subjective. The series also explores how identity and morality intersect, and how the search for one can shape the other. Arya Stark's transformation into a faceless assassin is not merely a plot line about vengeance, it is a profound meditation on selfhood and ethics. In shedding her name and past, Arya gains power, but she also risks losing the very identity that once gave her actions meaning. Her struggle to reconcile her thirst for revenge with the person she once was mirrors a broader philosophical question: can we truly become something new without losing ourselves? And if morality is shaped by identity, what happens when that identity is stripped away? At the heart of these explorations is Martin's fundamental belief that people are not static archetypes but dynamic, evolving beings. Circumstances change them. Choices redefine them. Even the most villainous characters are given motives and backstories that humanize them, while the noblest heroes are capable of betrayal, cruelty, or cowardice. This complexity is not an act of cynicism but an act of realism. It reflects Martin's conviction that morality is not a fixed compass but a series of choices made in the face of impossible dilemmas, choices that reveal who we are even as they shape who we become. This human-centered approach to storytelling is one of the reasons A Song of Ice and Fire resonates so deeply with readers. It invites us to see ourselves in its characters, in their failures and triumphs, their doubts and desires. We understand Tyrion's yearning for recognition, Arya's hunger for justice, Jon's struggle with duty, and Daenerys' conflicted sense of purpose because these are our struggles too. In their world of dragons and ancient prophecies, we see reflections of our own battles, to define ourselves, to live by our principles, and to reconcile the people we are with the people we hope to become. Ultimately, Martin's saga is a reminder that identity is not destiny, and morality is not absolute. Both are forged in the crucible of experience, shaped by the choices we make and the prices we are willing to pay. And perhaps that is the most enduring lesson of all, that in the end, the greatest battles are not fought on fields of war or for thrones of iron, but within the human heart, where love and hate, duty and desire, good and evil are locked in an eternal, ever-shifting dance. It is in that dance, messy and uncertain, that Martin finds the true essence of the human story. Martin's masterful command of a human-centered approach to storytelling is undeniably one of the paramount reasons A Song of Ice and Fire resonates so profoundly and enduringly with its vast readership. This narrative philosophy masterfully invites us to transcend the fantastical elements and instead, to truly see ourselves within the intricate tapestry of its characters, to recognize our own vulnerabilities and strengths, our own failures and triumphs, our most gnawing doubts and our most fervent desires mirrored in their experiences. Consider, for instance, Tyrion Lannister, whose sharp intellect and biting wit are often overshadowed by his physical otherness and the constant yearning for the recognition and respect that his lineage ought to guarantee but rarely bestows. We understand his deep-seated pain and his relentless pursuit of validation because, in various forms, this desire for acceptance is a fundamental human longing. Similarly, Arya Stark's fierce independence and unyielding hunger for justice, born from witnessing unimaginable cruelty and loss, strikes a chord within us. Her journey from privileged noble to a cunning, vengeful assassin is driven by a visceral need to right wrongs, a need that echoes our own moral compass. Jon Snow's perpetual struggle with the onerous burden of duty, often forcing him to make heartbreaking sacrifices for the greater good, speaks to the universal conflict between personal aspirations and the demands placed upon us by society or circumstance. And Daenerys Targaryen's increasingly conflicted sense of purpose, as she grapples with the allure of power and the moral compromises it demands, reflects our own internal battles to maintain our principles in the face of immense pressure. In their world, brimming with the awe-inspiring spectacle of dragons soaring through the skies and the ominous weight of ancient prophecies unfolding, we discover not just escapism, but profound reflections of our own battles. These are the deeply personal struggles to define ourselves amidst external expectations, to live authentically by our core principles even when it's difficult, and to bridge the often disparate gap between the people we currently are and the aspirational selves we relentlessly hope to become. The universality of these character arcs is what transforms a fantasy epic into a mirror for the human condition. Ultimately, George R.R. Martin's sweeping saga transcends mere entertainment to deliver a potent and enduring reminder that identity is not a predetermined fate, etched in stone at birth, and morality is never an absolute, unshakable doctrine. Both are dynamic, evolving constructs, meticulously forged and reforged in the unyielding crucible of experience. They are shaped, often subtly, sometimes dramatically, by the myriad choices we make throughout our lives and, crucially, by the often steep prices we are willing to pay for those choices. The narrative consistently demonstrates that character is not inherited but built, brick by painful brick, decision by agonizing decision. And perhaps this is the most enduring and profound lesson gleaned from A Song of Ice and Fire, that in the grand theater of life, the greatest and most consequential battles are not fought on sprawling fields of war, nor for the glittering allure of iron thrones, but rather within the intricate, often tumultuous confines of the human heart. It is within this sacred, internal space that the timeless, fundamental forces of love and hate, duty and desire, good and evil are locked in an eternal, ever-shifting, profoundly intimate dance. It is within the raw, messy, and inherently uncertain rhythms of this internal dance, a dance of conflicting impulses, moral quandaries, and profound emotional depth, that Martin, with unparalleled insight, truly unearths and illuminates the very essence of the human story, revealing its complexity, its beauty, and its often tragic grandeur. Chapter 12, The Weight of Prophecy and the Shadows of Destiny. Few forces in A Song of Ice and Fire exert as deep and elusive an influence as prophecy. Like the ancient myths that echo through its world, prophecy in George R.R. Martin's saga is at once a guiding star and a dangerous snare, a source of hope, fear, manipulation, and ruin. It shapes decisions, legitimizes claims, fuels faith, and ignites wars. Yet it is also treacherously ambiguous, its meaning as mutable as the people who interpret it. In this world, prophecy is not a straightforward revelation of fate but a mirror that reflects human nature itself, our longing for certainty in an uncertain world, our desperation to believe that our lives are part of a larger design, and our capacity to twist destiny to suit our desires. The most famous prophecy in the series, and perhaps its most important, is that of Aza Ahai, the prince that was promised. According to legend, Aza Ahai was a hero who, thousands of years ago, forged a sword of fire and drove back the darkness during the long night. The prophecy foretells that he will be reborn amid smoke and salt to fight once more when darkness returns. Like many prophecies, its language is poetic, cryptic, and deliberately open to interpretation. Countless characters believe, or hope, that they are the promised savior. Stannis Baratheon, urged on by the zealot Melisandre, is convinced of his destiny and sacrifices everything in its pursuit, only to find ruin and death. Daenerys Targaryen, born amid fire and storm and emerging as a breaker of chains, seems to embody the prophecy's promise in another way. And then there is Jon Snow, whose parentage, resurrection, and role in the war against the dead mark him as a possible fulfillment of the ancient words. This ambiguity is not a narrative oversight, it is the point. Martin uses prophecy to explore how people interpret the unknown and how those interpretations shape their choices, often with catastrophic consequences. Melisandre's unwavering faith in her visions blinds her to their complexity. She sees only what she wishes to see, bending the prophecy to fit her expectations. Her mistakes, and the tragedies they cause, underscore a fundamental truth: prophecy in Martin's world is not destiny delivered whole and unambiguous. It is a riddle whose answers are shaped as much by human bias and hope as by divine will. This theme recurs throughout the series. Daenerys' visions in the House of the Undying, for example, are filled with cryptic imagery that seems to foretell her future: the fall of kings, the betrayal of lovers, the birth of dragons. Yet their meanings remain elusive until long after the events have passed, if they ever become clear at all. Similarly, Maggie the Frog's prophecy to Cersei Lannister, that she will be queen until a younger, more beautiful one casts her down, becomes a driving obsession that shapes every decision Cersei makes. Her paranoia leads her to lash out at perceived threats, often hastening the very downfall she seeks to avoid. The prophecy becomes self-fulfilling, not because it is inevitable, but because Cersei's belief in it dictates her actions. This is one of Martin's most profound insights: prophecy has power not because it predicts the future, but because people believe it does. That belief can inspire greatness or unleash destruction. It can unite armies under a banner of destiny or drive them to slaughter in its name. It can give individuals purpose or plunge them into despair. In this sense, prophecy is less a force of fate than a psychological and socio-political tool, a weapon wielded by those who understand its sway over the human mind. Melisandre uses it to rally men to Stannis' cause. The High Sparrow uses religious prophecy to challenge the authority of the crown. Even Varys, who professes skepticism, manipulates beliefs in destiny to advance his own political aims. Yet prophecy's true significance in A Song of Ice and Fire lies not only in how it shapes individual choices, but in what it reveals about Martin's worldview. In traditional fantasy, prophecy often serves as a narrative anchor, a fixed point around which the story revolves. The chosen hero is destined to rise, the Dark Lord destined to fall, and the outcome, though delayed by obstacles, is ultimately preordained. Martin rejects this formula. His prophecies are slippery, unreliable, and often false. They illuminate possibilities but guarantee nothing. Fate, in his universe, is not a straight road but a labyrinth, one that characters must navigate without knowing where it leads. This subversion reflects Martin's broader rejection of deterministic storytelling. For him, the future is not written. It is shaped by the choices of individuals, by chance, and by forces beyond anyone's control. Prophecy may hint at outcomes, but it does not dictate them. Even if someone fulfills the conditions of a prophecy, they may do so in ways that no one, not even the prophets, expected. This uncertainty keeps the story grounded in realism. It reflects the way history unfolds in the real world, guided by belief and chance as much as by design, shaped by countless decisions rather than a single inevitable destiny. There is also a philosophical dimension to Martin's treatment of prophecy, one that speaks to humanity's relationship with time, meaning, and mortality. People cling to prophecy because it offers the illusion of control in a chaotic world. It suggests that our lives are part of a larger story, that our struggles have purpose, that there is a pattern beneath the apparent randomness of existence. But Martin suggests that this longing for destiny is as dangerous as it is comforting. It can blind us to the realities of the present, justify atrocities in the name of a future that may never come, and absolve us of responsibility for our choices. Belief in fate, he implies, can be a way of surrendering agency, and agency, in the end, is the very thing that defines humanity. This tension, between destiny and choice, between prophecy and free will, lies at the heart of the series' most profound questions. Are characters like Jon, Daenerys, and Bran truly destined for the roles they play, or do their actions make the prophecies come true? Is there a grand design at work in the struggle against the long night, or are people simply imposing order on chaos? And if the future is unwritten, what responsibility do individuals have to shape it? These questions remain deliberately unanswered, and in their ambiguity lies the series' philosophical depth. Ultimately, prophecy in A Song of Ice and Fire is not about predicting the future. It is about exploring how humans grapple with the unknown, how we seek meaning in chaos, how we interpret signs and symbols, how we shape our actions in response to what we believe is destined to happen. It is about the tension between hope and fear, between the desire to believe in something larger than ourselves and the need to take responsibility for our own fate. In Martin's world, destiny is not a chain that binds us. It is a story we tell ourselves, and one that, like all stories, can be rewritten. And yet, even as the series challenges the notion of fixed fate, it never fully dismisses the possibility that something larger is at work. The recurrence of ancient patterns, the strange coincidences, the cyclical nature of history, all hint at a design beyond human understanding. Perhaps prophecy is not a map of what must be, but a whisper of what might be. Perhaps destiny exists not as an immutable law but as a set of possibilities shaped by human will. And perhaps, in the end, the truth lies somewhere between chaos and order, in the delicate balance between the paths we choose and the roads that seem to choose us. In this way, prophecy becomes more than a narrative device. It becomes a metaphor for the human experience itself, for our yearning to understand the future, our fear of its uncertainty, and our power to shape it despite not knowing what lies ahead. Like the characters who struggle to interpret the visions and riddles that haunt their world, we too live our lives under the shadow of destiny, seeking meaning in signs and stories, hoping to leave a mark on a future we cannot see. And it is in this shared struggle, between fate and free will, between prophecy and possibility, that Martin's fantasy becomes a reflection of our own deepest truths. Chapter 13, Religion, Belief, and the Gods of Ice and Fire. If power is the engine that drives A Song of Ice and Fire, and prophecy its most alluring mystery, then religion is its moral compass, though one that rarely points in a single direction. Faith in Martin's world is neither a simple backdrop nor a convenient plot device. It is a living, breathing force that shapes societies, legitimizes rulers, inspires wars, and provides solace to the suffering. It is also a source of hypocrisy, manipulation, and violence. In exploring religion with such nuance, Martin achieves something rare in fantasy literature. He treats belief not as window dressing but as an essential component of political, cultural, and psychological life. Through the myriad faiths of Westeros and Essos, he examines one of humanity's oldest questions. Why we believe, and what belief does to us. The most prominent religion in Westeros is the Faith of the Seven, a syncretic belief system that mirrors the structure and influence of medieval Christianity. It worships a single deity with 7 aspects: father, mother, warrior, maiden, smith, crone, and stranger, each representing a facet of the divine. The faith provides not only spiritual guidance but also political power, wielding immense influence through its priests and the High Septon, the closest thing the realm has to a pope. The faith's temples, known as septs, are centers of community life, its rituals woven into the fabric of daily existence. Yet its relationship with power is complex. Kings seek its blessing to legitimize their rule, while the faith itself often acts as a counterbalance to royal authority. The rise of the militant sparrows under the High Sparrow, a populist religious movement that challenges the decadence of the nobility, shows how faith can both uphold and subvert existing hierarchies. In contrast to the structured orthodoxy of the faith of the seven stands the old gods of the forest, the ancient religion of the first men and the children of the forest. Centered around sacred weirwood trees and their carved faces, this faith is decentralized, animistic, and deeply tied to the natural world. There are no priests, no temples, no hierarchy, only a quiet communion with the spirits believed to reside in nature. The old gods embody a worldview in which humanity is part of a larger, mysterious order, subject to forces beyond its understanding or control. Their presence is most keenly felt in the north, where the stark words "winter is coming" encapsulate a philosophy that emphasizes humility, endurance, and respect for the cycles of life and death. In an age increasingly dominated by human ambition and organized religion, the old gods represent an older, more primal spirituality. One that resonates with characters like Jon Snow and Bran Stark, whose fates are deeply entwined with the ancient mysteries of the land. Across the sea in Essos, religion takes on more diverse and often more radical forms. Chief among these is the faith of Arhlor, the Lord of Light, a dualistic religion that envisions the universe as a battlefield between light and darkness, fire and ice, life and death. Its priests and priestesses, such as Melisandre and the Ros of Myr, wield seemingly miraculous powers, raising the dead, conjuring visions, and even birthing shadow assassins. Yet their faith is also ruthless and uncompromising, demanding sacrifices and preaching a cosmic struggle that justifies horrific acts. Arhlor's theology, with its emphasis on divine destiny and apocalyptic conflict, reflects humanity's age-old yearning to impose order on chaos, to see existence as a struggle with a clear purpose and an inevitable outcome. But it also exposes the dangers of certainty, the willingness to commit atrocities in the name of a higher cause, and the blindness that comes from believing oneself an instrument of destiny. Other religions add further layers of complexity to Martin's exploration of belief. The drowned god of the Ironborn glorifies conquest and death, preaching that what is dead may never die and sanctifying the raider's way of life. It is a faith perfectly suited to a culture that values strength and sees the sea as both cradle and grave. The many-faced god, worshipped by the faceless men of Bravos, offers a radically different perspective, one that embraces death as a universal constant and a mercy rather than a punishment. In their service, killing is not murder but a sacred act, a fulfillment of divine will. Meanwhile, the great stallion of the Dothraki reflects the nomad's worldview, a god of conquest and virility, whose favor is measured by the strength of one's khalasar. Each faith, in its own way, is both a reflection of and a justification for the culture that created it. This interplay between belief and society is one of the central themes of A Song of Ice and Fire. Religion does not exist in isolation, it shapes and is shaped by political power, social order, and cultural identity. Kings seek the blessing of the faith of the Seven to legitimize their rule. The Ironborn justify their raids as holy acts. The Red Priests see political leaders as prophesied saviors. Religion is thus both a tool and a weapon, a means of consolidating power, mobilizing masses, and framing conflicts as divinely ordained. It can inspire acts of extraordinary selflessness, as when Beric Dondarrion sacrifices his life repeatedly for his cause, but it can also excuse unimaginable cruelty, as when Stannis Baratheon burns his daughter alive in the name of Arhlor. Yet Martin is careful not to reduce religion to mere politics. He is deeply interested in the personal, existential dimensions of faith, in what belief means to individuals who seek comfort, meaning, or redemption in a world defined by uncertainty and suffering. For some, religion offers solace and structure. For others, it is a source of purpose, a way to make sense of tragedy or injustice. And for still others, it is a burden, a set of expectations they cannot meet, or a narrative they cannot accept. Davos Seaworth's skepticism toward Arhlor, despite witnessing genuine miracles, speaks to the tension between faith and reason. The Hound's bitter rejection of the faith of the Seven reflects his disillusionment with the hypocrisy of religious institutions. and Arya's time in the House of Black and White forces her to confront uncomfortable questions about death, justice, and the nature of mercy. Through these varied perspectives, Martin refuses to offer a single, definitive statement about religion. Instead, he portrays it as a profoundly human phenomenon, capable of inspiring the best and worst in us, of binding communities together and tearing them apart. His world is one in which gods are silent but belief is deafening, where miracles may or may not be real, and where faith is often more powerful than the divine itself. At the same time, the presence of genuine supernatural phenomena, prophetic visions, resurrection, magical flames, complicates any attempt to dismiss religion as mere invention. The question of whether the gods are real is left deliberately ambiguous, and that ambiguity is part of the point. Martin suggests that the power of belief does not depend on the existence of the divine. It exists because people need it, because in a world as brutal and uncertain as Westeros, belief offers something that politics, wealth, and power cannot: the promise that our lives have meaning, that justice exists beyond human failings, and that there is a purpose to our suffering. In the end, religion in A Song of Ice and Fire is not about proving the existence of gods. It is about exploring what humans do with the idea of them. It is about the stories we tell to explain the unexplainable, the rituals we create to impose order on chaos, and the ways we wield belief to build, destroy, control, and transcend. It is about how faith can be both a chain and a key, binding us to tradition or freeing us from despair. And it is about how, even in a world of dragons and magic, the most powerful force may still be the one that exists entirely within the human heart, the need to believe in something greater than ourselves. In this way, Martin's exploration of religion becomes another mirror held up to reality. It shows us that belief, like power, is neither inherently noble nor inherently corrupt. It is a tool, a weapon, a comfort, and a curse, one that can elevate or destroy depending on how it is used. And like the gods themselves, it remains as mysterious, as dangerous, and as necessary in Westeros as it does in our own world. Chapter 14: War, Chaos, and the Price of Ambition. In the brutal universe of A Song of Ice and Fire, war is not merely a backdrop for heroic deeds or a vehicle for epic spectacle. It is a living, relentless force that shapes the destinies of kingdoms and the fates of individuals alike. George R.R. Martin has often said that he writes about the human heart in conflict with itself, and nowhere is that conflict more vividly realized than in the crucible of war. His portrayal of battle is not romantic or glorified, it is visceral, ugly, and deeply consequential. War in this world is not about honor and destiny, it is about power, fear, vengeance, survival, and the devastating cost of ambition. From the moment King Robert Baratheon dies and the fragile peace of his reign collapses, Westeros descends into chaos. The War of the Five Kings erupts, fracturing the realm into rival factions, each convinced of the righteousness of their cause. Yet Martin does not present this conflict as a clear-cut struggle between good and evil. Instead, it is a complex web of ambitions and grievances, each justified from a certain perspective and each leading inexorably to tragedy. Stannis Baratheon's claim is rooted in law and legitimacy, Robb Stark's in justice and vengeance, Renly's in charisma and popular support, Balon Greyjoy's in opportunism, and Joffrey's in raw dynastic power. None of them emerge victorious, and none achieve what they set out to accomplish. The war consumes them all, and countless others besides. One of Martin's most significant achievements as a storyteller is the way he strips war of its familiar heroic veneer. Battles are not noble tests of courage and valor, they are chaotic, bloody, and often meaningless. The Battle of the Blackwater is not a glorious triumph for the Lannisters but a horrific slaughter, fought amid wildfire and screams. The Red Wedding is not a noble victory for House Frye but an act of treachery that stains the realm with infamy. Even Robb Stark, the young wolf, hailed as a hero by his men and feared by his enemies, is not immune to the brutal reality that victory on the battlefield does not guarantee political success. His assassination is a stark reminder that cunning and cruelty often triumph over courage and honor. Through these depictions, Martin dismantles one of the most enduring tropes of the fantasy genre, the idea that war is a crucible for heroism and a path to glory. In his world, war is a mechanism of suffering, and its effects ripple far beyond the battlefield. Entire regions are laid to waste, their crops burned and their people slaughtered. Refugees flood the roads, bandits prey on the weak, and once prosperous towns collapse into ruin. Armies march under noble banners and speak of honor and destiny, but the small folk, the innocent majority, pay the price in blood and starvation. In this way, Martin forces readers to confront a truth often obscured in stories of kings and conquest, that the real victims of war are rarely the ones who start it. The psychological toll of war is another recurring theme. Soldiers and commanders alike are scarred, not just physically, but emotionally and morally. Sandor Clegane, a brutal warrior, is haunted by his experiences and disillusioned by the emptiness of violence. Jaime Lannister, once the embodiment of knightly arrogance, is humbled and transformed by the horrors of captivity and combat. Even Tyrion Lannister, who orchestrates the defense of King's Landing, is left disfigured and traumatized by the experience. Martin does not shy away from exploring the lingering consequences of war, the way it reshapes personalities, fractures identities, and leaves wounds that never fully heal. War also exposes the fragility of moral codes. In times of peace, ideals like honor, justice, and mercy seem attainable. In war, they are often luxuries that must be sacrificed. Eddard Stark's rigid adherence to honor leads to his downfall, but Tywin Lannister's ruthless pragmatism, exemplified by the Red Wedding, secures his family's survival, at least temporarily. Stannis Baratheon sacrifices his daughter to secure victory, believing that the ends justify the means. These choices force both characters and readers to confront difficult ethical questions. Is victory worth any price? Does survival excuse atrocity? Can there be justice in war, or is it always a mask for power? Martin offers no easy answers, but his narrative suggests that war has a way of corroding even the most deeply held principles. At the same time, war is a crucible that forges new orders from the ashes of the old. Dynasties fall, new powers rise, and the political landscape is reshaped. The destruction wrought by conflict paves the way for unexpected alliances and unlikely leaders. Out of chaos emerges transformation, sometimes for the better, often for the worse. This dynamic mirrors real history, where wars have toppled empires, redrawn borders, and created opportunities for those bold or ruthless enough to seize them. Martin's depiction of war captures this duality. It is both a destroyer and a creator, a force of annihilation and renewal. The metaphor of the Game of Thrones reaches its most brutal expression in times of war. The quest for power becomes all-consuming, and ambition knows no limits. Yet even the most ambitious players often discover that the game cannot be controlled. War unleashes forces that no one can fully direct: resentment, rebellion, unforeseen alliances, and unintended consequences. Tywin Lannister believes he can end the Northern Rebellion with treachery, but his actions sow seeds of hatred that will one day destroy his house. Stannis seeks to win the realm through sheer will, but his rigid pursuit of destiny leads him to ruin. War, Martin suggests, is an instrument of power, but it is also a beast that can devour its masters. The larger irony, and one of Martin's most devastating insights, is that the great wars of Westeros are often fought for reasons that, in hindsight, seem tragically small. The War of the Five Kings begins as a dispute over succession, but it spirals into a cataclysm that weakens the realm, paving the way for far greater threats. While lords and kings fight over thrones and titles, the true enemy, the White Walkers, gather strength in the frozen north, indifferent to human squabbles. In this sense, the wars of men are both grand and absurd, monumental in their consequences, yet insignificant in the face of the deeper existential battles that lie ahead. This juxtaposition, between the petty ambitions of humans and the vast, impersonal forces that threaten them, is central to Martin's critique of war. It reflects a deep historical truth, that humanity often exhausts itself in conflicts of pride and greed while ignoring the challenges that truly matter. The wars of Westeros, like many wars in our own history, are less about necessity than about ego, legacy, and the illusion of control. They are waged for crowns that will crumble, for lands that will one day change hands again, for glories that will fade into legend. And yet, despite its futility and horror, war remains an inescapable part of Martin's world, and of human nature. It is both a symptom and a cause of the flaws that define us, our ambition, our fear, our tribalism, our hunger for power. It is a reflection of the same impulses that drive us to create art, build civilizations, and dream of immortality. In showing war stripped of its glory, Martin does not argue that it can be eradicated. Instead, he forces us to confront it honestly, to see it not as an abstract concept but as a living, breathing reality, shaped by choices and paid for in blood. In the end, War in A Song of Ice and Fire is not just a plot device or a backdrop. It is a lens through which Martin explores the deepest truths about humanity, our capacity for destruction and renewal, our willingness to sacrifice everything for power, and our tragic tendency to repeat the same mistakes again and again. It is the price we pay for ambition, and the reminder, etched in blood and ash, that even the mightiest empires are only one war away from ruin. Chapter 15: The Psychology of Power, Ambition, Corruption, and Fear. Power in A Song of Ice and Fire is not a simple matter of crowns and swords. It is a psychological force, a consuming hunger, a seductive poison, a relentless motivator that shapes the actions, values, and identities of those who seek it. George R.R. Martin understands that power is rarely about what one has, it is about what one believes one deserves, what one fears to lose, and what one is willing to sacrifice to gain more. Through his vast cast of characters, he offers a penetrating study of the human mind under the influence of power, exploring how ambition can transform ideals into obsessions, how authority corrodes morality, and how the fear of losing power can be more dangerous than the pursuit of it. Few characters embody the corrupting nature of power more fully than Cersei Lannister. From the beginning, her ambitions are rooted not merely in self-interest but in a deep resentment of the limitations imposed on her by gender and tradition. "I should have been born a man," she reflects bitterly, a statement that encapsulates both her sense of entitlement and her rage at a world that denies her the authority she believes she deserves. When she finally achieves the crown she has long coveted, Cersei's paranoia and cruelty intensify. Every perceived threat becomes an existential danger, every challenge a betrayal. Her fear of losing power, more than her desire to wield it, drives her to acts of escalating brutality, alienating allies, and undermining the very authority she seeks to preserve. Cersei's story is not just a cautionary tale about ambition, it is a psychological portrait of how power twists the mind, turning insecurity into tyranny and transforming legitimate grievances into destructive paranoia. Petter Baelish, Littlefinger, represents another face of power psychology, the cold, calculating manipulator who seeks control not for its own sake but as a means of transcending the limitations of his birth. Born into obscurity, Littlefinger uses intelligence, cunning, and patience to climb from insignificance to influence. For him, power is an intellectual pursuit, a game whose rules he understands better than anyone else. Yet even he is not immune to its intoxicating effects. His schemes grow ever more audacious, his risks greater, his belief in his own infallibility more absolute. Ultimately, his downfall comes not from a rival's superior cunning but from his own hubris, a common fate for those who mistake their mastery of the game for invincibility. Through Littlefinger, Martin illustrates how the pursuit of power can become an addiction, one that blinds even the most brilliant minds to their own vulnerabilities. If Littlefinger and Cersei reveal the corrosive effects of power on the ambitious, Stannis Baratheon shows how it can warp even those who believe themselves righteous. Stannis is not driven by greed or vanity. He does not crave power for pleasure or prestige. He seeks it because he believes it is his by right, a duty he must fulfill regardless of the cost. Yet this sense of moral certainty becomes its own form of corruption. Convinced that his cause is just, Stannis commits atrocities he would once have condemned, including the sacrifice of his own daughter. His story highlights one of Martin's most unsettling insights, that the most dangerous individuals are often those who believe their actions are morally justified. Power corrupts not only because it tempts us with wealth and glory, but because it convinces us that our end excuse any means. Tyrion Lannister, by contrast, provides a subtler exploration of power's psychological effects. Unlike many others, Tyrion does not lust for absolute authority. His relationship with power is shaped instead by insecurity and resentment. Mocked and belittled all his life, he craves recognition, a desire that power seems to promise but never fully delivers. Even at the height of his influence as Hand of the King, Tyrion is haunted by the knowledge that his accomplishments will never erase society's contempt for his birth and appearance. His arc reveals another dimension of power, its inability to heal deep psychological wounds. No amount of authority can compensate for a lifetime of rejection, and no political triumph can silence the voices of self-doubt. Power, in this light, becomes less a prize than a coping mechanism, a way of seeking validation in a world that refuses to grant it. Daenerys Targaryen's evolution provides one of the most complex studies of power in the series. Initially, her authority is rooted in liberation. She frees slaves, dismantles oppressive regimes, and envisions a new order built on justice and equality. Yet as her power grows, so too does her belief in her own destiny. The Mother of Dragons, once a symbol of hope, begins to see herself as the arbiter of what the world should be, and anyone who stands in her way as an obstacle to be removed. This shift illustrates one of Martin's most profound points. Power does not merely corrupt by tempting people to act against their values, it can also corrupt by convincing them that they embody those values, that their will and the greater good are one and the same. Daenerys' story blurs the line between idealism and tyranny, showing how even noble intentions can be twisted by the seductive belief in one's own righteousness. The psychology of power in Martin's world is also defined by fear, the fear of losing what one has gained, of being forgotten, of fading into irrelevance. Tywin Lannister's ruthless pursuit of legacy is driven less by greed than by terror, the fear that his family name will crumble, that all he has built will vanish when he is gone. This fear drives him to unspeakable acts of brutality and betrayal, and yet it is never truly assuaged. His death, sudden, ignominious, and devoid of the dignity he so fiercely sought, underscores the futility of his efforts. Power, Martin suggests, can never fully conquer mortality. It may shape how we are remembered, but it cannot save us from being forgotten. Fear also drives the actions of those without power. It keeps the small folk compliant, the bannermen loyal, and the servants silent. It is the tool through which rulers maintain order and the weapon they wield against dissent. But it is also a corrosive force that undermines authority from within. Rulers who govern by fear often find themselves trapped by it, forced to escalate their cruelty to maintain control. In this way, power becomes a prison, one that ensnares not only the oppressed but the oppressor as well. Throughout A Song of Ice and Fire, Martin shows that power is not a monolithic force but a deeply human experience. It exposes character, amplifies flaws, and tests the limits of morality. It can elevate the noble and destroy the wicked, but it can also do the reverse. It is sought by the ambitious, feared by the humble, and resented by those who bear its burdens. Above all, it is never static. Like fire, it grows, consumes, and transforms, and like fire, it is as likely to destroy its wielder as to illuminate their path. In the end, the psychology of power in Martin's world is a study of humanity itself, our desires, our fears, our capacity for self-deception, and our endless drive to matter. Power promises fulfillment but rarely delivers it. It offers control but often leaves those who wield it enslaved to their own ambitions. And it teaches, again and again, the most humbling of lessons, that even the greatest kings and conquerors are, in the end, only human, driven by the same hungers, haunted by the same fears, and bound by the same frailties as the rest of us. Chapter 16, Betrayal, Loyalty, and the Bonds That Break. In a world where crowns are contested, thrones are toppled, and alliances shift like sand in a storm, loyalty is perhaps the most precious and most fragile currency of all. It binds families together, holds kingdoms intact, and sustains armies through blood and fire. And yet, in A Song of Ice and Fire, it is also a force constantly under siege, tested by ambition, fear, love, revenge, and the relentless pursuit of survival. George R.R. Martin understands that loyalty is not a static virtue but a living tension, one that must constantly be renegotiated in a world where betrayal is often the price of staying alive. Through this tension, he explores one of the deepest truths about human nature, that bonds, no matter how strong, are always vulnerable, and that betrayal, no matter how justified, leaves scars that never truly heal. Nowhere is this theme more painfully evident than in the story of Eddard Stark. As Warden of the North and a man defined by honor, Ned's loyalty is unwavering to his king, to his family, and to the ideals that guide his life. Yet it is precisely this loyalty that seals his fate. His refusal to betray Robert's children, even when doing so might save his life, leads to his execution. In this moment, Martin subverts the traditional fantasy trope that virtue will be rewarded. In Westeros, loyalty is not always noble, and betrayal is not always villainous. It is a reminder that in a world ruled by politics and power, principles can be fatal, and that the line between loyalty and self-destruction is often razor-thin. Robb Stark inherits his father's values and his fate. Bound by vows and oaths, he is determined to avenge his father's death and secure the independence of the North. But when he breaks his betrothal to House Frey for love, he sets in motion a chain of events that will end with one of the most infamous betrayals in fantasy literature, the Red Wedding. Walder Frey's massacre of Robb, his mother, and their bannermen is not merely a shocking twist, it is a thematic statement. It illustrates how betrayal is rarely random in Martin's world. It is calculated, strategic, and often born of its own perceived betrayals. The Freys see themselves as wronged, their loyalty slighted, their honor dismissed. In this grim calculus, betrayal is not treachery, it is justice. And so, a sacred bond, guessed right, is shattered, and the cost is measured in rivers of blood. Betrayal, in Martin's hands, is not simply an act of treachery but a reflection of deeper truths about human relationships. It often arises not from malice but from conflicting loyalties. Jaime Lannister's infamous slaying of King Aerys II is one such example. To the world, he is an oath-breaker, a man who betrayed his sworn duty as a member of the King's Guard. But Jaime's choice was driven by a deeper loyalty to the innocent lives Aerys planned to burn. His betrayal of one oath was, in his mind, a fulfillment of another, a commitment to protect the realm. This moral ambiguity is central to Martin's portrayal of loyalty. It is not always clear where one's true duty lies, and sometimes betrayal is the only way to remain loyal to a higher ideal. Tyrion Lannister's betrayal of his family, culminating in the murder of his father, is another deeply psychological example. It is not motivated by ambition or strategy but by years of humiliation, rejection, and abuse. Tyrion's act is both a personal reckoning and a final severing of bonds that were broken long before he pulled the trigger. His betrayal is not a rejection of loyalty itself but a demand for dignity in a family that has denied it to him. Through Tyrion, Martin shows that betrayal is often the consequence of loyalty abused, that when trust is weaponized or exploited, betrayal becomes not only inevitable but justified. At the same time, Martin never allows us to forget the power and beauty of loyalty when it endures. Brienne of Tarth's unwavering dedication to Catelyn Stark's memory, even after Catelyn's death, is one of the series' most poignant demonstrations of devotion. Her quest to protect Sansa and Arya, driven by an oath few would fault her for abandoning, becomes a symbol of integrity in a world defined by treachery. Likewise, Davos Seaworth's steadfast loyalty to Stannis, even when he disagrees with his king's choices, illustrates the depth of faith that can exist between individuals. These characters remind us that loyalty, though rare, is not extinct. It still exists, sometimes quietly, sometimes painfully, even amid betrayal's chaos. The bonds of family, perhaps the strongest of all, are also the most complicated. House Lannister is built on the principle that a lion does not concern itself with the opinion of sheep, yet its members betray and undermine one another with regularity. Cersei's manipulation of Jaime, Tyrion's resentment of his sister, and Tywin's ruthless control over his children show how loyalty can be poisoned by pride, resentment, and ambition. House Stark, by contrast, embodies loyalty as both strength and vulnerability. The Stark children's deep love for one another gives them purpose and resilience, but it also makes them targets. Loyalty becomes both shield and shackle, a source of identity and a liability in a world that punishes attachment. Perhaps the most insidious betrayals in Martin's world are those that occur not between individuals but between individuals and the institutions they serve. The Night's Watch, sworn to defend the realm, is betrayed by its own men, corrupted by politics, and weakened by internal strife. The faith of the Seven, meant to guide and protect, is weaponized for power. Even the very concept of king, once a symbol of unity, becomes hollow when the crown itself is passed between betrayers and usurpers. These betrayals speak to a broader truth, that loyalty is not just a personal virtue but a foundation upon which societies are built. When that foundation is eroded, kingdoms fall, orders crumble, and chaos reigns. Yet for all its devastation, betrayal is not portrayed as purely destructive. It is also a catalyst for change. It exposes hypocrisy, ends stagnation, and reshapes power dynamics. The fall of the Targaryen dynasty began with betrayal, but it also paved the way for a new political order. The treachery at T. Red Wedding destroyed the Stark cause, but it also sowed the seeds of vengeance and renewal. Betrayal, in Martin's world, is a force of entropy and evolution, tearing down what is old to make way for what is new, however brutal that process might be. The tension between loyalty and betrayal in A Song of Ice and Fire mirrors the contradictions of human nature itself. We crave trust but fear vulnerability. We value loyalty but justify betrayal when it serves our ends. We cling to bonds even as we test their limits. Martin's characters embody these contradictions, their choices shaped by love, pride, desperation, and belief. In their triumphs and failures, they reveal that loyalty is not a simple virtue and betrayal is not a simple sin. Both are inevitable parts of the human experience, forces that destroy and create, that wound and heal, that define who we are and what we are willing to become. In the end, Martin's message is as uncomfortable as it is profound. In a world as treacherous and uncertain as Westeros, loyalty is both a beacon and a burden. It is a choice that demands sacrifice, a bond that can be broken with a word, a trust that may be repaid with a knife in the back. But it is also, perhaps, the one force that gives meaning to a world otherwise consumed by chaos. It is the fragile thread that holds families, kingdoms, and hearts together, and even when it breaks, it leaves behind the memory of what it meant to believe in something greater than oneself. Chapter 17, Love, Desire, and the Politics of the Heart. For all the bloodshed, treachery, and ambition that define A Song of Ice and Fire, beneath the surface of war and power struggles lies another force just as potent and far more unpredictable, love. Love in George R.R. Martin's world is not a mere subplot or sentimental distraction, it is a driving force that shapes destinies, topples empires, and determines the fate of nations. Yet, like everything else in Westeros and Essos, it is not simple or pure. It is passionate and painful, selfless and selfish, noble and destructive. It is the most human of all Martin's themes, and perhaps the most dangerous, because it is the one thing that even the most calculating minds cannot fully control. At its best, love in Martin's world inspires courage, sacrifice, and redemption. Jon Snow's love for Ygritte is a rare moment of tenderness in a story defined by cruelty and betrayal. Their bond transcends the ideological divide between the Night's Watch and the Free Folk, challenging Jon's understanding of duty and loyalty. Yet it also complicates his choices, forcing him to confront the painful truth that love and obligation are often in conflict. When Ygritte dies in his arms during the battle for Castle Black, it is not just the death of a beloved, it is the death of a dream, a reminder that even the most sincere love cannot always overcome the world's harsh realities. Through Jon and Ygritte, Martin explores love as both a source of strength and a crucible of suffering, a force that ennobles even as it breaks the heart. Similarly, Jaime Lannister's love for Brienne of Tarth is a catalyst for transformation. What begins as contempt evolves into respect, and respect deepens into something unspoken yet profound. Jaime's relationship with Brienne forces him to confront the man he has become, cynical, bitter, and dishonorable, and to strive for something better. This evolution illustrates one of Martin's most consistent messages: love is not always about passion or possession. Sometimes it is about recognition, seeing in another person the possibility of redemption and choosing to pursue it. Through Brienne, Jaime rediscovers the ideals he once abandoned, proving that love can be as much about becoming as it is about being. But love in Martin's universe is rarely untainted by politics, ambition, or self-interest. Sansa Stark's early romantic dreams, shaped by songs and stories of noble knights and gallant princes, are shattered by the brutal reality of political marriage. Betrothed to Joffrey Baratheon, she learns that love in Westeros is often a weapon wielded by those in power. Marriages are alliances, not unions of hearts. They are contracts meant to consolidate power, secure succession, and forge peace, often at the expense of those forced into them. Yet Sansa's disillusionment also makes her wiser and more strategic, teaching her how to survive in a world where the language of love is often a mask for control. Cersei and Jaime's incestuous bond represents love's most destructive potential. Their relationship, born of genuine affection and shared identity, ultimately becomes a source of ruin for themselves, their family, and the realm. Their love blinds them to consequences, fuels their arrogance, and isolates them from those who might have restrained their worst impulses. Cersei's obsessive love for her children, too, is a double-edged sword. It humanizes her, showing the depth of a mother's devotion, but it also drives her to monstrous acts. In Martin's world, love is never simply good or bad. It is a force that can inspire great deeds and unforgivable sins, often in the same breath. Nowhere is this duality clearer than in the story of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, a love that, though glimpsed only in fragments, has seismic consequences. Whether their relationship was a passionate romance or a reckless abduction, it sets off a chain of events that leads to Robert's rebellion, the fall of a dynasty, and the reshaping of the entire realm. Their story illustrates how love, even when private and personal, can have profound political repercussions. It reminds us that in Martin's world, the personal is always political, and that the affairs of the heart can alter the course of history just as surely as battles and treaties. Desire, love's darker twin, is another force Martin examines with unflinching realism. Petyr Baelish's obsession with Catelyn Stark, for example, is not love but a consuming fixation that shapes the entire course of his life. His manipulation of events, his betrayals, even his mentorship of Sansa are driven by a desire to possess what he could never have. This distortion of love into obsession illustrates how desire can become a destructive spiral, fueling ambition and cruelty under the guise of devotion. Likewise, Renly Baratheon and Loras Tyrell's relationship, though tender and genuine, exists in a society that forces them to conceal it, a commentary on how power structures can warp even the most sincere expressions of love. Martin also explores the transactional nature of love, how it is bought, sold, and commodified in a world obsessed with power. Daenerys Targaryen's marriage to Khal Drogo begins as a political arrangement devoid of affection, yet it evolves into a complex and deeply felt bond. This evolution reflects one of the series' subtler insights, that love is not always instantaneous or romantic. It can grow from shared experience, mutual respect, and the forging of trust amid adversity. But it also highlights how love can be used as a tool, a means of survival, a bargaining chip, a strategic move in a larger game. At the same time, Martin does not shy away from the ways love can liberate. It can give people strength to defy expectations, as when Samwell Tarly leaves behind a life of fear to protect Gillian, her child. It can inspire acts of immense bravery, as when Brienne risks her life for a promise born of loyalty and affection. It can even humanize the monstrous, as seen in Sandor Clegane's unlikely bond with Arya Stark, a relationship that, while not romantic, is nonetheless rooted in a form of love, the begrudging, protective kind that emerges despite bitterness and pain. Ultimately, Martin portrays love not as a singular experience but as a spectrum. From pure devotion to obsessive desire, from transformative redemption to catastrophic downfall. It is not something that exists apart from politics, power, or war, but something that permeates and complicates them. Love in A Song of Ice and Fire is not an escape from the brutal realities of the world, it is one of the forces that make that world so brutal, and so profoundly human. The politics of the heart are no less treacherous than the politics of the throne. They are driven by impulses just as strong, betrayals just as devastating, and ambitions just as consuming. Love builds alliances and destroys kingdoms. It redeems the damned and damns the virtuous. It gives life meaning and brings about untold suffering. And in the end, it is perhaps the one force that no one, not king or commoner, conqueror or captive, can fully master. It is the most dangerous weapon in Martin's world precisely because it is the one we wield against ourselves. In this, Martin's portrayal of love is deeply, almost painfully, realistic. It refuses to comfort or reassure. It reminds us that love is not a fairy tale ending but an ever-shifting battlefield, one where victory and defeat are often indistinguishable, and where the greatest battles are fought not with armies or blades but with trust, forgiveness, and the courage to open one's heart, even knowing it may break. Chapter 18: Gender, Power, and the Struggle for Agency. The brutal world of A Song of Ice and Fire is one built on hierarchies, of class, of lineage, of wealth, but perhaps none are as pervasive or as deeply ingrained as those of gender. Westeros and Essos are societies structured around patriarchal norms, where power is assumed to belong to men and where women, more often than not, are treated as pawns in games they do not control. Yet within this oppressive structure, George R.R. Martin crafts some of the most complex, defiant, and transformative female characters in modern literature. They do not simply react to the systems that constrain them, they challenge, subvert, and, at times, overthrow them. Through their struggles, triumphs, and failures, Martin explores the nature of agency, how it is denied, how it is seized, and how it reshapes both the individual and the world. Cersei Lannister's story encapsulates the bitterness and fury of a woman born into privilege yet denied true authority. As a daughter of one of Westeros' most powerful houses, she has wealth, beauty, and influence, but never the legitimacy that would have been hers had she been born male. Her resentment is palpable. When I was little, my father told me that I could not be heir to Casterly Rock because I was a girl, she reflects, a wound that festers into rage over the course of her life. Cersei's pursuit of power is driven as much by this lifelong slight as by ambition itself. She schemes, manipulates, and murders not merely for dominance but for recognition, to prove that she can wield power as ruthlessly as any man. And yet, her methods often mirror the very patriarchal structures she despises, revealing a paradox. In trying to transcend the system, she becomes a product of it. Cersei's tragedy is that her quest for agency is consumed by her hatred of those who denied it to her, leaving her as tyrannical and flawed as the men she seeks to surpass. Daenerys Targaryen offers a starkly different vision of female empowerment. From a timid exile sold into marriage, she transforms into a conqueror who breaks chains and commands armies. Her rise is not merely a story of personal empowerment but a reimagining of what power can be. Daenerys does not inherit authority, she builds it from nothing, forging her identity as a leader through resilience, empathy, and fire. Her journey reflects a profound truth, that power seized by those who were never meant to have it often carries a different moral weight. Yet even Daenerys' arc is not free from complexity. As her sense of destiny grows, so does her authoritarian streak. Her belief in her own righteousness, and her conviction that only she can save the world, leads her to justify increasingly brutal acts. Through Daenerys, Martin examines the fine line between liberation and domination, between wielding power to free others and wielding it to impose one's will. If Daenerys embodies revolutionary empowerment, Sansa Stark's evolution represents a quieter, more insidious form of agency, one forged not through rebellion but through adaptation. Initially a naive girl steeped in tales of chivalry and romance, Sansa is brutalized by the realities of political life. Yet rather than break under the weight of her circumstances, she learns from them. She studies her captors, observes their tactics, and eventually turns the tools of manipulation and diplomacy to her own ends. Sansa's story challenges the notion that power must always be loud, violent, or overt. Her strength is in her patience, her intelligence, and her ability to survive within the very systems designed to destroy her. By the time she emerges as a political player in her own right, Sansa has become a master of the soft power that governs courts and councils, proof that agency can take many forms, even in the most restrictive environments. Arya Stark, by contrast, rejects the role society attempts to impose on her entirely. Fiercely independent from a young age, Arya refuses to conform to the expectations of what a lady should be. Her journey, from noble daughter to assassin, is one of radical self-definition. In shedding her name, her face, and her identity, Arya explores the idea of agency as the freedom to become something entirely new. Yet her transformation also raises questions about what is lost in the pursuit of autonomy. In becoming no one, Arya risks severing the very connections, to family, to identity, to humanity, that once defined her. Her story is a meditation on the cost of freedom. How far one can go in seeking agency before one ceases to be oneself. Brienne of Tarth stands as one of the series' most direct challenges to gender norms. Scorned for her appearance and mocked for her ambition to be a knight, Brienne defies the limitations imposed upon her by sheer force of will. She lives by a code of honor in a world that constantly belittles her for it, proving that strength, courage, and virtue are not confined to any gender. Yet Brienne's story is not one of easy triumph. Her pursuit of knighthood is met with ridicule, and her loyalty is often dismissed. Through Brienne, Martin examines the cruelty of a society that punishes women for stepping outside prescribed roles, and the quiet, stubborn heroism required to defy that punishment anyway. Other female characters, too, offer unique perspectives on gender and power. Melisandre wields influence not through armies or titles but through faith and fear. Olenna Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns, demonstrates how intelligence and cunning can be just as potent as brute strength. Even minor figures, from Asha Greyjoy's defiance of Ironborn patriarchy to Ygritte's embodiment of free folk equality, reveal the myriad ways women navigate and resist the constraints of their societies. Each of these stories contributes to a larger mosaic of female experience, one that refuses to be reduced to a single narrative of empowerment or victimhood. Martin's portrayal of gender is not confined to women. The rigid expectations placed on men, to be warriors, rulers, conquerors, are equally scrutinized. Jon Snow's struggle with duty versus desire, Jaime Lannister's crisis of honor, and Samwell Tarly's rejection of martial ideals all highlight the suffocating nature of masculine roles. By exploring how gender norms constrain men as well as women, Martin paints a more comprehensive picture of a society trapped in its own rigid definitions of power and identity. What emerges from this tapestry is a nuanced, often uncomfortable exploration of gender as a social construct, one that shapes, limits, and distorts human behavior. Martin does not offer easy resolutions. His world is not one where sexism is magically erased or patriarchy easily dismantled. But in showing the many ways characters resist, subvert, and endure it, he illuminates the human capacity for resilience and transformation. In the end, A Song of Ice and Fire is not just a story about thrones and wars, it is a story about who gets to sit on those thrones, who is excluded from those wars, and how those exclusions are challenged. It is about the ways power is gendered, and how, despite those limitations, individuals find ways to claim it for themselves. The struggle for agency in Martin's world is deeply personal and profoundly political. It is a fight waged not only on battlefields but in bedrooms, council chambers, and quiet moments of defiance. And it is a fight that mirrors our own, a reflection of the ongoing human struggle to define ourselves not by the roles we are given, but by the ones we choose to claim. Chapter 19: Identity, Transformation, and the Masks We Wear. If there is one truth that resonates through every page of A Song of Ice and Fire, it is that identity is never static. Names, titles, loyalties, and even the deepest beliefs are mutable in George R.R. Martin's world. People change, sometimes slowly, sometimes violently, as circumstances force them to adapt, as trauma reshapes them, and as ambition drives them toward new versions of themselves. This fluidity of identity is not merely a character trait, It is a central theme that explores how people define themselves in a world that constantly tries to define them first. And in Martin's hands, this idea becomes a meditation on what it means to be human, that who we are is not fixed at birth but forged in the fires of experience, choice, and consequence. The Stark children provide some of the most compelling examples of identity's evolution. Arya Stark's journey is perhaps the most literal and dramatic. Stripped of her home, her family, and even her name, she becomes a living embodiment of transformation. Each new identity she assumes, orphan, beggar, servant, assassin, is a mask that allows her to survive in an environment determined to erase her. Yet the deeper she immerses herself in the faceless world of the House of Black and White, the more she is forced to confront a paradox. In becoming no one, she risks losing the very core of who she is. Arya's eventual rejection of total anonymity, her choice to reclaim her name and her family's cause, is a powerful statement about the nature of identity. We can change, disguise, and reinvent ourselves, Martin suggests, but we cannot entirely sever the threads that bind us to where we came from. Sansa Stark's evolution is subtler but no less profound. Beginning as a dreamy, naive girl enamored with songs of knights and princesses, she is forced to shed her illusions in the face of cruelty and betrayal. Her identity, once defined by innocence and expectation, is remade by necessity. She learns to navigate court politics, to speak the language of power, to wear masks of her own. At first, these masks are for survival, but over time they become part of her. By the time Sansa begins to assert herself as a political actor, the girl who once believed in fairy tales is gone, replaced by a woman who understands the harsh realities of the world, and how to shape them. Through Sansa, Martin illustrates how identity is forged not only by the choices we make but by the lies we learn to tell in order to endure. Jon Snow's arc, too, is one of transformation, not of names or faces, but of purpose. A bastard raised on the fringes of his own family, Jon begins his story defined by what he is not a Stark, not legitimate, not destined for greatness. But through his experiences with the Night's Watch, the Free Folk, and the war against the others, he gradually constructs an identity defined by what he is: a leader, a protector, a man who places duty above desire. Yet even as Jon grows into his role, questy awareness of identity continue to haunt him, particularly the revelations about his parentage, which threaten to upend everything he believes about himself. In Jon's story, Martin explores the tension between nature and nurture, blood and choice, legacy and individuality. We are shaped by where we come from, but we are not bound by it. Elsewhere, identity is weaponized as a political tool. Petyr Baelish reinvents himself from a powerless minor noble into one of the most dangerous players in the Game of Thrones. He does this not by brute force or ancient bloodlines but by carefully crafting a persona, the charming, helpful master of coin, that hides his ruthless ambition. Similarly, Varys, the spy master, makes his lack of identity his greatest strength. A eunuch from obscurity, he becomes a chameleon, assuming roles and disguises as needed, manipulating perceptions to serve his larger goals. Both men demonstrate how identity can be manufactured and manipulated, a performance designed to conceal, to deceive, and ultimately to control. Tyrion Lannister's story reveals a more internal struggle with identity. Born into wealth and privilege but scorned for his dwarfism, Tyrion is defined as a monster before he ever has a chance to define himself. Much of his arc revolves around his attempt to reclaim agency over his own narrative, to prove that he is more than the world's expectations. Yet even as he wields his intelligence and wit to carve out a place for himself, he is continually confronted with the gap between how he sees himself and how others perceive him. Tyrion's struggle reflects a universal human conflict, the tension between self-definition and external judgment, between the identities we build for ourselves and those imposed upon us. Even characters who seem static are often wearing masks. Jaime Lannister's identity as the Kingslayer, a Dishonored Knight reviled for his betrayal of Aerys II, obscures the deeper truth of his actions and motivations. For years, he allows this label to define him, even embracing it as a shield against disappointment. But as his character evolves, Jaime begins to question who he really is, the oath-breaker the world sees, or the man who acted to save countless lives. His journey is one of reclaiming his story from those who would define it for him, a struggle that echoes the broader theme of identity as something we must fight to own. In the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, transformation is not limited to individuals. Entire institutions, houses, and even nations reinvent themselves in response to shifting realities. The Targaryens redefine their legacy after the fall of their dynasty, clinging to prophecy and myth to justify their claims. The Night's Watch, once a noble order, becomes a penal colony, and then, under Jon Snow, attempts to reclaim its purpose. The Ironborn oscillate between piracy and kingship, their identity as reavers both a source of pride and a prison. These collective transformations mirror the individual ones, illustrating how identity operates on every level of Martin's world, as both a source of strength and a constraint to be transcended. Yet for all the masks his characters wear, Martin is clear about one thing: transformation always comes at a cost. To change is to lose something: innocence, certainty, belonging. Arya loses her childhood to vengeance. Sansa loses her illusions. Jon loses the simplicity of his old loyalties. Even those who gain power through transformation, Daenerys, Petter, Varys, often find themselves alienated from the people they once were. Identity is both a weapon and a wound, both an act of empowerment and a process of erasure. This complexity reflects one of Martin's most profound insights: identity is not a destination but a journey. It is not something we find but something we build, piece by piece, choice by choice, often in defiance of the forces that would shape us. It is fluid, fragile, and perpetually unfinished. And in a world as unforgiving as Westeros, the question of who we are is not merely philosophical, it is often a matter of life and death. Ultimately, A Song of Ice and Fire is a story about transformation, not just of kingdoms and dynasties, but of people. It is about the masks we wear to survive, the identities we construct to thrive, and the selves we discover, or invent, in the process. And it is about the truth that, even when those masks fall away, we are never quite who we were before. In Martin's universe, identity is not the armor that protects us from change, it is the forge in which change shapes us, again and again, until we are unrecognizable, even, sometimes, to ourselves. Chapter 20: Magic, Myth, and the Return of the Impossible. For much of A Song of Ice and Fire, the world George R.R. Martin builds feels almost historical in its realism, a brutal tapestry of politics, war, betrayal, and ambition more reminiscent of medieval Europe than of a traditional fantasy landscape. Yet beneath the clashing swords and whispered plots, something older and stranger stirs. It is the whisper of prophecy, the flicker of sorcery, the slow reawakening of forces long thought dead. Magic, in Martin's world, is not a constant hum but a rising tide, mysterious, unpredictable, and deeply entwined with the cycles of history. Its return is not merely a narrative device but a profound thematic statement about power, faith, and the limits of human control. From the very first pages, Martin sets the stage with a paradox: this is a world where magic once existed but has since faded into myth. The children of the forest, the others, the dragons, all are relics of a bygone age, dismissed by most as legends. Even the maesters of the citadel, custodians of knowledge, regard the arcane with skepticism, relegating tales of sorcery to dusty scrolls and children's stories. This skepticism serves a crucial purpose. It grounds the world, making the eventual resurgence of magic feel all the more momentous. When the dead begin to walk, when shadowy assassins are born of fire and blood, when dragons break free from their eggs, it is not simply spectacle, it is a seismic shift that redefines reality itself. The rebirth of dragons is the most dramatic symbol of this transformation. For centuries, the creatures had been extinct, their power reduced to bones and memories. Their return through Daenerys Targaryen's blood and fire ritual marks not only a turning point for her character but a reawakening of the world's dormant magic. Dragons are more than weapons, they are catalysts. Their presence strengthens sorcery, reshapes political dynamics, and revives ancient prophecies. The very laws of nature seem to bend around them. This intertwining of magic and destiny speaks to Martin's larger theme, that history is cyclical, that the forgotten will always return, and that humanity's illusion of control is just that, an illusion. Magic's re-emergence is not confined to the skies. In the icy wastes beyond the wall, the White Walkers, or others, rise as a chilling counterpoint to the fireborn dragons. Their power is ancient, their motives inscrutable, their very existence a challenge to human arrogance. They embody a primal, elemental force that predates kingdoms and crowns, a reminder that humanity's conflicts are insignificant in the face of nature's vast, indifferent cycles. The Other's return transforms the political landscape from a struggle for thrones into a battle for survival, shifting the series' scope from the personal and political to the existential and cosmic. Magic also manifests in subtler, more mysterious forms. The Red Priests of Arlor channel fire to heal, to kill, to reveal glimpses of the future. The Faceless Men of Bravos wield death like an art, blurring the line between the mundane and the divine. Bran Stark's Green Seer abilities reconnect humanity with the deep, animistic forces of the natural world, while the ancient weirwoods stand as silent witnesses to millennia of memory. Even seemingly minor acts, Melisandre's birth of a shadow assassin, Beric Dondarrion's repeated resurrections, are laden with significance, suggesting that magic is not merely a tool but a manifestation of forces far greater than individual will. One of Martin's most striking choices is his refusal to fully explain these forces. Unlike in many fantasy narratives, magic in A Song of Ice and Fire is never codified into a system with clear rules and limitations. It remains mysterious, often unreliable, and sometimes contradictory. This ambiguity serves a thematic purpose. It reinforces the idea that magic, like nature, is beyond human comprehension and control. It resists domestication. Just as kings cannot fully master their kingdoms, sorcerers cannot fully master their craft. Power, whether political or supernatural, always carries consequences beyond the grasp of those who wield it. This unpredictability also shapes how magic interacts with religion and prophecy. The visions granted by the Lord of Light, the ancient prophecies of Azor Ahai, and the cryptic green dreams of the children all hint at destinies that may or may not unfold as expected. Characters interpret these signs through the lens of their own desires and beliefs, often with disastrous results. Stannis Baratheon is led astray by Melisandre's misread visions, Daenerys struggles to decipher the meaning of her prophetic dreams, Bran glimpses fragments of the past and future but cannot fully understand their significance. In Martin's world, prophecy is not a map but a mirror, one that reflects human hopes, fears, and misconceptions more than it reveals immutable truths. The reintroduction of magic also serves a narrative function. It destabilizes the political order. The great lords and schemers who once thought themselves masters of fate find their carefully laid plans upended by forces they cannot predict or control. Dragons burn fleets, undead armies march south, and visions reveal truths that undermine alliances. The rules of the game change, and with them, the balance of power. This tension between the rational and the supernatural, between the world as humans have shaped it and the deeper world that shapes them, is one of the series' most compelling dynamics. Yet Martin does not romanticize magic. For all its wonder, it is also terrifying and destructive. Dragons are not tame pets but forces of nature capable of incinerating cities. The resurrection of the dead comes with a loss of humanity. Prophecy drives people to fanaticism and despair. Magic is neither good nor evil, it simply is a raw expression of power that reflects the intentions of those who wield it. In this way, it mirrors the political power that dominates the series, a force that can liberate or destroy, elevate or corrupt, depending on whose hands it inhabits. At its heart, the return of magic is a metaphor for the return of the past, the resurfacing of forgotten truths, buried traumas, and ancient forces that humanity cannot escape. The world of A Song of Ice and Fire is shaped as much by what came before as by what is yet to come, and magic is the embodiment of that continuity. It is the living memory of the world, older than any kingdom and more enduring than any dynasty. Its resurgence is a reminder that history is not linear but cyclical, that the myths we dismiss often have roots in reality, and that the future is shaped as much by what we have forgotten as by what we know. In the end, Martin uses magic not as a crutch but as a lens, a way to explore humanity's relationship with the unknown. It is a force that humbles kings, elevates outcasts, and reminds everyone, from the lowest peasant to the mightiest conqueror, that they are part of a larger story. Magic is the great equalizer, the ultimate wild card, the thing that makes a song of ice and fire more than a tale of politics and war. It is the song beneath the steel, the breath beneath the fire, the heartbeat of a world that is at once familiar and utterly fantastical. And as it returns to that world, reshaping its destiny, it reminds us, and the characters who inhabit it, that the impossible was never truly gone. It was only waiting to wake. In the intricate tapestry woven by Martin, magic transcends its conventional role as a mere plot device, instead becoming a profound lens through which the very essence of humanity's relationship with the unknown is explored. It is not a convenient solution to narrative dilemmas, but rather a fundamental force that underpins the entire saga, challenging perceptions and reshaping destinies. This potent, often unpredictable, power serves as a great equalizer, demonstrating its capacity to humble even the most formidable monarchs, to elevate those cast aside by society, and to instill a sense of shared vulnerability in everyone from the humblest peasant to the most ambitious conqueror. Through magic, all are reminded that their individual narratives are but threads in a much larger, more ancient story. Indeed, magic is the ultimate wild card, the disruptive element that elevates a song of ice and fire far beyond a simple chronicle of political machinations and grand-scale warfare. It is the haunting song that resonates beneath the clash of steel, the life-giving breath that fuels the destructive power of fire, and the persistent heartbeat of a world that simultaneously feels intimately familiar and utterly fantastical. As this mystical force gradually reawakens and reasserts itself within the narrative, it inevitably reshapes the destiny of the world and its inhabitants. In its resurgence, both the characters and the readers are reminded that the impossible was never truly absent, it merely lay dormant, patiently awaiting its moment to stir and redefine the boundaries of their perceived reality. This awakening of magic is not just a return, it is a fundamental reordering, a profound shift that imbues the world with a renewed sense of wonder, peril, and boundless possibility, forever altering the course of Westeros and beyond. Chapter 21: History, Memory, and the Weight of the Past. The Seven Kingdoms are defined not only by their battles and betrayals but also by the ghosts that linger long after swords are sheathed and kings are crowned. In A Song of Ice and Fire, history is not a distant backdrop but an active force, shaping decisions, fueling conflicts, and casting long shadows over the present. It is written and rewritten, remembered and forgotten, glorified and suppressed. And in George R.R. Martin's world, the past is never truly past. It lives in the bloodlines of great houses, in the stones of crumbling castles, in the songs sung by bards, and in the grudges that refuse to die. To understand Westeros and Essos is to understand how memory, both personal and collective, shapes the future. From the very beginning, history hangs over the story like a sword. The events that drive the series, Robert's Rebellion, the fall of the Targaryens, the disappearance of the dragons, are not mere exposition but living realities that inform every decision made by those who come after. Robert Baratheon's hatred of House Targaryen, for example, is not a passing grudge but the product of a rebellion born of love, betrayal, and vengeance. It shapes his reign, his paranoia, and his policies long after the war itself has ended. Likewise, Ned Stark's sense of duty and honor is deeply rooted in the memory of his father and brother's brutal executions at the hands of King Aerys II, a trauma that informs his suspicion of tyranny and his insistence on justice, even when it costs him his life. But Martin is careful to show that history is not an objective record, it is a story, and like all stories, it is shaped by those who tell it. The version of Robert's Rebellion told in the halls of Winterfell differs from the one remembered in Dawn, where Elia Martell's murder remains a festering wound. The tales of Aegon the Conqueror's unification of the Seven Kingdoms are remembered as glorious in King's Landing but as conquest and subjugation in Dawn and the North. Even the faith's teachings about the Age of Heroes and the Long Night vary from place to place, colored by culture, politics, and belief. This malleability of history is one of Martin's central insights, that the past is not a fixed truth but a weapon, a tool, a justification, wielded by those in power to legitimize their rule or condemn their enemies. This manipulation of memory is most evident in the myths and legends that permeate the story. The figure of Aza Ahai, the hero who will wield a burning sword to save the world from darkness, is revered by some as prophecy and dismissed by others as superstition. Yet its power lies not in whether it is true but in how people believe it. Stannis Baratheon's claim to be Aza Ahai reborn shapes his decisions and those of his followers. Daenerys sees echoes of the prophecy in her own destiny, guiding her toward choices she might otherwise not make. Even if the prophecy is false, its influence is real, a testament to the power of stories to shape reality. The characters themselves are often prisoners of their own histories. Jaime Lannister's identity as the Kingslayer, defined by a single act taken decades earlier, follows him wherever he goes, shaping how others see him and how he sees himself. Sandor Clegane's hatred of knights and their ideals stems from childhood trauma inflicted by his brother, a memory that drives his cynicism and rage. Even Petyr Baelish's decades-long quest for power is fueled by the humiliations of his youth and his obsession with Catelyn Stark. These personal histories are not just backstory, they are the engines that drive character motivation and the chains that bind them to paths they might otherwise abandon. Houses, too, are shaped by the weight of their pasts. The Starks cling to ancient traditions and the memory of their role as kings in the north, shaping their identity even under southern rule. The Targaryens are haunted by the dual legacy of conquest and madness, struggling to reclaim a throne that their ancestors both built and destroyed. The Lannisters' obsession with legacy and reputation, epitomized by Tywin's relentless pursuit of family dominance, reflects an awareness that history will remember them not for their wealth but for their endurance. In Martin's world, the past is not just a source of pride or shame, it is a blueprint for the present, dictating choices and defining ambitions. Even the land itself is a monument to memory. The ruins of Harrenhal, blackened by dragonfire, stand as a cautionary tale about hubris. The wall, colossal and ancient, is both a physical barrier and a symbol of humanity's fear of the forgotten threats beyond. The crypts of Winterfell, filled with stone effigies of long-dead Starks, remind the living of their duty to the dead. Everywhere one looks, the world is scarred and shaped by what came before, a physical manifestation of the idea that history is always present, even when it is buried beneath snow and stone. Yet Martin also shows that history is not immutable. It is constantly reinterpreted, revised, and contested. New evidence, new perspectives, and new generations reshape how the past is understood. The revelation of Jon Snow's parentage, hidden for decades, assumed to be one thing but revealed as another, is a powerful example of how a single piece of forgotten history can alter the entire political landscape. In this way, Martin reminds us that history is not just something we inherit, it is something we continually rewrite. The theme of historical repetition is woven deeply into the fabric of the narrative. The conflicts of the present often mirror those of the past, rebellions follow rebellions, betrayals echo betrayals, and patterns of power rise and fall. Like the tides. The Dance of the Dragons, a brutal civil war between Targaryen claimants centuries before the main story, is eerily similar to the War of the Five Kings, with rival factions, shifting alliances, and devastating consequences. This cyclical view of history underscores one of Martin's most sobering points, that humanity rarely learns from its mistakes. The same desires, fears, and ambitions that fueled past conflicts continue to drive the present and will likely shape the future. But if history is a cycle, it is not an unbreakable one. There are moments when individuals challenge the weight of the past, when they refuse to be defined by old wounds or ancient grudges. Jon Snow's decision to ally with the wildlings, despite centuries of enmity, is one such moment, an attempt to break a cycle of hatred in the face of a greater threat. Daenerys' quest to break the wheel is another, a conscious rejection of the dynastic struggles that have defined Westerosi politics for generations. These moments are rare and fraught with difficulty, but they suggest that while history is a powerful force, it is not destiny. In the end, A Song of Ice and Fire is as much about the past as it is about the present. It is about the stories we tell ourselves to justify our actions, the memories that shape our identities, and the legacies that haunt our choices. It is about how history can both bind and blind us, and how, sometimes, the greatest act of courage is to confront it honestly and choose a different path. The weight of the past is heavy in Martin's world, but it is not immovable. And in the struggle between memory and possibility, between what was and what could be, lies the series' deepest and most enduring tension. Chapter 22, The Global Stage, Essos, Culture, and the Other Side of the World. Westeros may be the heart of a song of ice and fire, but it is not the whole world. Across the narrow sea lies Essos. Vast, diverse, and teeming with civilizations as ancient as they are complex. While Westeros is mired in dynastic struggles and feudal politics, Essos offers a broader canvas, one that expands the series beyond the traditional boundaries of medieval fantasy. It is a continent defined by trade and conquest, religion and slavery, freedom and tyranny. It is where empires rise and fall, where cultures collide and intermingle, and where the dreams of power extend far beyond the Iron Throne. Through Essos, George R.R. Martin transforms his saga from a tale of kings and knights into a sweeping exploration of civilization itself, how societies are built, how they function, and how they shape those who move through them. From the free cities in the west to the shadowed lands beyond Ass High in the east, Essos is a study in contrasts. The free cities, Bravos, Pentus, Myr, Volantis, and others, are mercantile powerhouses, heirs to the fractured remnants of the Valyrian freehold. They are republics and oligarchies rather than hereditary monarchies, places where power is bought, traded, and negotiated rather than inherited. In Bravos, wealth and merit, not birth, dictate influence, though even there, inequality festers beneath the surface. The Iron Bank wields more power than any crown, shaping the fate of kingdoms with the stroke of a quill. This emphasis on commerce and contract stands in sharp contrast to Westeros' rigid feudalism, showing that power can take many forms, not just swords and titles, but gold and debt. Further south, in the ancient city of Volantis, the echoes of empire still reverberate. Once the heart of the Valyrian world, it clings to the past with its grand temples and towering black walls, a living monument to the glory and hubris of a fallen civilization. The Valyrian freehold, long vanished, remains a looming presence over Essos, much as the Roman Empire does in our own history. Its roads still knit the continent together, its language remains the lingua franca of trade and scholarship, and its ruins hint at power beyond comprehension. Through Valyria, Martin explores the theme of imperial legacy, how even the mightiest empires crumble, leaving behind both wonders and wounds that shape the world for centuries to come. To the east, the vast Dothraki Sea stretches across the heart of the continent, a land without cities, without kings, without walls. The nomadic Dothraki, with their khalasars and codes of honor, embody a radically different way of life. They are conquerors, yes, but also deeply bound by tradition, ritual, and kinship. Their society, centered around the horse, is both brutal and beautiful, free yet constrained by its own rigid norms. In depicting the Dothraki, Martin draws inspiration from the Mongol hordes and the horse tribes of the Eurasian steppes, using them to explore how cultures can thrive outside the structures of statehood and empire. Yet their raids and slaving expeditions also raise uncomfortable questions about morality and civilization, questions Daenerys Targaryen must confront as she learns to navigate their world. The slave cities of Slavers Bay, Astapor, Yunkai, and Meereen present another facet of Essosi culture, one built on human bondage and exploitation. These societies, with their wealth, opulence, and rigid hierarchies, mirror the great slave economies of the ancient Mediterranean. Daenerys' conquest and attempted reform of these cities form one of the most significant arcs in the series, serving as both a political and moral crucible. Her struggle to abolish slavery, and the resistance she faces from entrenched interests, illustrates the immense difficulty of changing deeply rooted social structures. It also forces her to confront uncomfortable questions about power and responsibility. Can liberation be imposed from above? Can a foreign conqueror truly understand the society she seeks to transform? And what happens when ideals collide with reality? Further east still lie the enigmatic cities of Karth and Ashai, places shrouded in mystery and legend. Karth, with its wealth and decadence, is a crossroads of trade and culture, a reminder that power is not always expressed through armies but through commerce, art, and diplomacy. Ashai, on the edge of the known world, is a city steeped in sorcery and shadow, hinting at forces far older and stranger than those known in the West. These distant lands broaden the narrative scope of the series, suggesting that the known struggles of Westeros and Slavers Bay are but small parts of a much larger, more complex world. Essos also serves as a stage for exploring questions of identity, belonging, and displacement. For Daenerys, it is both a place of exile and a crucible of transformation. Stripped of her birthright, she must learn to navigate a bewildering array of cultures, each with its own customs, values, and systems of power. Through her eyes, we see the tension between ideals and realities, between the dream of conquest and the messy realities of governance. We also see how encounters with different cultures challenge her assumptions, and, by extension, ours, about what power looks like and how it should be wielded. The cultural diversity of Essos is not merely background detail, it is a commentary on the multiplicity of human experience. In Westeros, power is largely defined by hereditary rule and the divine right of kings. Martin also uses Essos to explore the legacies of colonialism and cultural imperialism. The Valyrian legacy, with its dragon lords and slave armies, is still felt across the continent, shaping economies, languages, and social hierarchies long after Valyria's fall. Daenerys' attempts to liberate Slavers Bay echo the complexities of colonial intervention in our own world, the tension between good intentions and unintended consequences, between moral certainty and cultural arrogance. Even the faith of our law, spreading from Ashai to Volantis to Westeros, reflects the dynamics of religious expansion and cultural exchange, reshaping societies in its fiery image. In many ways, Essos is the mirror against which Westeros is measured. It is a reminder that the struggles for power, identity, and survival are not confined to a single continent or culture. It shows us that history's great forces, empire, commerce, slavery, religion, play out in countless forms across the globe. And it suggests that the fate of the world will not be decided solely in the halls of King's Landing or the snows of Winterfell, but in the streets of Meereen, the vaults of Bravos, and the shadows of Ashai. By broadening the scope of his narrative to encompass Essos, Martin elevates A Song of Ice and Fire from a story of thrones and kingdoms to a story of civilizations, their rise, their fall, their intersections, and their conflicts. He reminds us that no nation is an island, that power is always part of a larger web of forces, and that the world is far bigger, and far stranger, than any one culture's view of it. In the intricate tapestry of Essos, we glimpse not just another continent but a reflection of humanity's boundless diversity, and its endless capacity for both cruelty and wonder. Chapter 23, The Age of Adaptation, From Page to Screen and Beyond. If A Song of Ice and Fire had remained only a series of books, complex, sprawling, and often unfinished, it might still have secured a place among the great works of fantasy literature. But its journey did not end on the page. It exploded beyond its original medium, transforming from a cult literary sensation into a global phenomenon. The primary catalyst for this transformation was HBO's Game of Thrones, a television adaptation that redefined what serialized storytelling could achieve and forever altered the landscape of popular culture. Its success was not inevitable, it was the product of ambition, risk, and a convergence of forces, creative, technological, and cultural, that together brought George R.R. Martin's world to life for millions who had never turned a single page. The idea of adapting A Song of Ice and Fire was, for many years, considered impossible. The books were too vast, too intricate, too expensive to bring to the screen. Previous attempts to translate high fantasy into film or television had often faltered under the weight of their own ambition. Yet in the early 2000s, television itself was changing. The rise of premium cable networks and the shift towards serialized storytelling created an environment where long-form, character-driven narratives could thrive. It was in this new landscape that David Benioff and D.B. Weiss approached Martin with a bold proposal, not a film, but a television series that would adapt the novels in full, with the time and depth they required. The gamble paid off. When Game of Thrones premiered in 2011, it was unlike anything that had ever aired on television. Its cinematic scale, intricate plotting, and moral complexity set it apart from the genre conventions that had long defined fantasy adaptations. It embraced Martin's world in all its brutality and nuance, the political machinations, the shocking betrayals, the refusal to shield major characters from death. It trusted its audience to follow a story that spanned continents and generations, to invest in dozens of characters whose fates were anything but guaranteed. In doing so, it set a new standard for prestige television, proving that fantasy could be not only commercially viable but artistically ambitious. The impact was immediate and seismic. Viewership soared with each season, and the series quickly transcended its genre, becoming a cultural juggernaut. It sparked water-cooler conversations, academic debates, and countless online discussions. Characters like Tyrion Lannister and Daenerys Targaryen became household names. Phrases like "winter is coming" and "a Lannister always pays his debts" entered the global lexicon. The series' shocking twists, the Red Wedding, the fall of the Wall, the death of Ned Stark, became shared cultural moments, uniting millions of viewers in collective gasps of disbelief. The adaptation also had a profound effect on the source material itself. Sales of Martin's novels skyrocketed, reaching audiences far beyond the niche fantasy readership they had initially attracted. The books were translated into dozens of languages, and their influence spread across literature, gaming, art, and academia. Entire subgenres of fantasy fiction were inspired by Martin's gritty realism and morally ambiguous characters. Meanwhile, the show's success spurred a wave of high-budget, serialized fantasy projects from other studios and networks, eager to replicate its formula. Yet the transition from page to screen was not without controversy. As the series caught up to Martin's unfinished novels, the showrunners were forced to chart their own course, crafting storylines that diverged from or condensed the source material. Some of these choices were praised for their boldness, others were met with criticism from fans who felt the adaptation had lost the depth and nuance of the books. The final seasons, in particular, sparked heated debate over pacing, character arcs, and narrative resolution. The divisive reception of the show's conclusion, with many lamenting its rushed storytelling and thematic departures, highlighted the challenges of adapting a sprawling, unfinished saga into a finite television narrative. Despite these controversies, the legacy of Game of Thrones is undeniable. It broke records for viewership, swept award ceremonies, and influenced everything from fashion to tourism. Filming locations like Dubrovnik, Belfast, and Iceland became pilgrimage sites for fans. Merchandising exploded, from replica swords to themed board games. Academic conferences were dedicated to its themes and impact. Even political discourse occasionally borrowed its language and imagery, a testament to how deeply the series had permeated the cultural consciousness. The adaptation also revealed something fundamental about the nature of storytelling in the 21st century, that the boundaries between mediums are increasingly porous. Game of Thrones was not just a television show, it was a transmedia experience. Its story continued in companion books, behind-the-scenes documentaries, video games, graphic novels, and fan-created works. It became a global ecosystem, one that extended far beyond the control of its original creators. Fan theories shaped the conversation around the show, while online communities dissected every scene and speculated about every mystery. This participatory culture reflected a broader shift in how stories are consumed and experienced in the digital age, not as passive entertainment, but as collaborative, evolving phenomena. Martin himself has often remarked on the bittersweet nature of adaptation. On one hand, the show brought his world to an audience beyond anything he could have imagined. On the other, it created a version of the story that now exists alongside, and sometimes in tension with, his own. Readers debate which version is canon, and future generations will encounter the saga through multiple, overlapping lenses. But perhaps this multiplicity is fitting. A Song of Ice and Fire is, at its core, a story about perspective. about how history is shaped by those who tell it. The existence of multiple versions of the story only deepens that theme, blurring the line between fiction and reality. In many ways, the adaptation of A Song of Ice and Fire is itself a metaphor for the saga's larger themes. Like the great houses of Westeros, the story evolved, adapted, and expanded beyond its original borders. It was shaped by new forces, new interpretations, new ambitions. And in the process, it became something larger, not just a series of books or a television show, but a shared cultural narrative that transcends mediums and generations. The journey from page to screen also sets the stage for what comes next. HBO has already expanded the franchise with House of the Dragon, a prequel exploring the Targaryen Civil War, and other spin-offs are in development. The world Martin created shows no signs of fading. If anything, it is evolving once again, finding new forms and new audiences. Just as the myths of the first men live on in the songs of Westeros, the story of Ice and Fire will continue to be retold, reshaped by each new storyteller, reimagined by each new generation. The age of adaptation, then, is not an ending but a transformation. It is proof that stories, like the worlds they depict, are living things. They grow, change, and adapt, and in doing so, they endure. A Song of Ice and Fire began as a story told by one man at his typewriter. It became a shared language spoken by millions. And in its evolution from page to screen and beyond, it reminds us that the power of story lies not just in how it is told, but in how it is lived. We have come a long way since that first spark of imagination took root in the mind of George R.R. Martin, from the windswept north and the storm-lashed halls of Westeros to the great cities and vast steppes of Essos, and from the quiet pages of a manuscript to the bright, unblinking eye of the global screen. The tapestry of A Song of Ice and Fire has grown richer and more complex with every chapter, revealing not just the breadth of a fictional universe, but the depth of its cultural resonance and the power of its ideas. At this point in our journey, it is worth pausing to consider what we have learned, and where the road ahead might lead. We have seen how Martin's world is built upon layers of history, myth, and meaning, a place where the past is never truly gone, where ancient forces stir beneath the surface, and where every decision carries the weight of centuries. We have watched kingdoms rise and fall, houses clash and crumble, and individuals struggle to define themselves against the tides of fate and memory. We have traced how power operates not only through armies and thrones but through stories, symbols, and the subtle machinery of belief. And we have followed the re-emergence of magic, not as a convenient plot device, but as a metaphor for the unknown forces that shape human destiny, unpredictable and uncontrollable. We have also crossed the narrow sea, where the world expands beyond the familiar and challenges our assumptions about civilization itself. In Essos, we encountered a mosaic of cultures and systems, mercantile republics and nomadic hordes, slaver oligarchies, and mystical cities, each revealing a different face of power and humanity. Through these varied landscapes, Martin invites us to see the world not as a monolith but as a complex, shifting web of societies, each shaped by its own histories, values, and contradictions. And then, in a twist as dramatic as anything in the books, we witnessed the story itself undergo a transformation. What began as a literary work of singular vision became a shared global experience, translated into dozens of languages and broadcast into hundreds of millions of homes. The HBO adaptation did more than merely bring the story to life. It reshaped the cultural landscape, proving that fantasy could command the center of mainstream conversation and redefining how stories are told, consumed, and shared in the modern age. It turned characters into icons, phrases into proverbs, and moments of fiction into collective memory. In doing so, it blurred the line between art and audience, between storyteller and participant, and between the fictional past of Westeros and the very real present of our own world. Yet this transformation also raised deeper questions, about fidelity and interpretation, about the tension between authorial intent and collaborative creation, and about the nature of myth itself. The world of A Song of Ice and Fire now exists in multiple forms, each with its own truths, contradictions, and legacies. Like the histories recounted within the story, it is no longer one story but many, led atop one another, intersecting and diverging in ways that mirror the complexities of memory and myth-making. And so we stand at a crossroads, between past and future, between page and screen, between the world as it was imagined and the world as it has become. The journey so far has been about creation, the building of a world, the shaping of a mythology, the telling of a story. But the journey that lies ahead is about consequence. It is about how that story lives on, how it shapes the stories that come after it, how it redefines genres and industries, how it inspires, challenges, and provokes those who encounter it. In the chapters to come, we will turn our attention to the legacy of A Song of Ice and Fire, to the impact it has had on literature, television, and storytelling itself. We will explore how it stands alongside other great cultural phenomena like Harry Potter and Star Wars, how it has influenced new generations of creators, and how it continues to evolve in the hands of fans, scholars, and artists around the world. We will consider what it means for a story to become a myth in its own right, a shared narrative that transcends its origins and becomes part of the cultural fabric. The world we have examined is vast, but its greatest power lies not in its scale but in its endurance. Stories like A Song of Ice and Fire do not simply end. They ripple outward, changing the medium that birthed them, reshaping the genres they inhabit, and echoing far beyond their final pages or final episodes. They remind us that stories are not passive entertainments but living forces, capable of moving hearts, shaping ideas, and altering the course of culture itself. The tale is not yet over. As we step into the final act of our exploration, we turn our gaze from the past to the horizon, to the legacy this world leaves behind and the future it continues to shape. The Song of Ice and Fire is no longer just Martin's story. It is ours. And its echoes will continue to ring long after the last word is written. Chapter 24, Legends Among Legends, A Song of Ice and Fire in the Pantheon of Pop Culture. In the grand story of modern storytelling, only a handful of fictional worlds have transcended their medium to become myths, shared languages that cross borders, generations, and disciplines. Star Wars is one. Harry Potter is another. And now, A Song of Ice and Fire stands alongside them, a saga that began as a complex literary project and grew into one of the most influential cultural forces of the 21st century. But what sets Martin's creation apart is not merely its popularity or commercial success, though both are undeniable, but the way it reshaped the expectations of what fantasy could be, how stories could be told, and how deeply they could resonate with the world around them. The comparisons to Star Wars and Harry Potter are inevitable and instructive. Each began with a singular creative vision: George Lucas's space opera of rebellion and redemption, J.K. Rowling's magical coming-of-age story, George R.R. Martin's morally complex political epic. Each built a fully realized world, one of galaxies and empires, one of wizards and dark lords, one of lords and dragons, and invited audiences not just to read or watch, but to inhabit those worlds. And each evolved beyond its original form into sprawling transmedia franchises, encompassing films, television, games, merchandise, theme parks, and academic scholarship. Yet the similarities end where the tone begins. Star Wars and Harry Potter follow the classic hero's journey, clear lines between good and evil, chosen ones destined to save the day, climaxes that reaffirm the triumph of hope and courage. A Song of Ice and Fire rejects that narrative comfort. It thrives in the grey spaces, questioning the very notions of destiny and morality that its counterparts embrace. Heroes die. Villains triumph. Power corrupts, and noble intentions lead to ruin. There is no single chosen one, no singular battle between light and darkness, only a shifting landscape of human desire, compromise, and consequence. This complexity is part of what makes Martin's world so distinct. It does not promise escape from reality but instead reflects it, in all its chaos and contradiction. The numbers alone speak to the series' impact. The books have sold over 90 million copies worldwide, translated into more than 45 languages. Game of Thrones was broadcast in over 170 countries, reaching hundreds of millions of viewers and becoming one of the most watched television series in history. It shattered Emmy records, spawned a global tourism boom, and inspired countless scholarly works, from political science papers on power dynamics to philosophical essays on morality and justice. Like Star Wars and Harry Potter, it became more than entertainment. It became a cultural event, a shared reference point that united people across cultures and continents. But the deeper comparison lies in influence. Star Wars reshaped science fiction, blending mythic archetypes with futuristic spectacle and ushering in the era of the blockbuster. Harry Potter revived children's literature, proving that young adult fiction could command global attention and spark generations of new readers. A Song of Ice and Fire transformed fantasy itself, challenging the genre's tropes and elevating it to new heights of sophistication and relevance. It showed that fantasy could grapple with real-world issues, politics, gender, religion, power, without sacrificing its sense of wonder. It opened the door for a wave of grimdark narratives and morally complex epics that followed in its wake, from Joe Abercrombie's first law series to Netflix's adaptation of The Witcher. It also transformed television. Before Game of Thrones, few believed that fantasy could succeed at a premium level on the small screen. Its success shattered that notion, paving the way for big-budget adaptations of The Wheel of Time, The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, and countless others. It proved that audiences were hungry for complex, serialized narratives, and that television could rival, and even surpass, cinema as the dominant medium for epic storytelling. In this sense, Martin's Saga did for television what Star Wars did for film and Harry Potter did for publishing. It changed the rules of the game. Where A Song of Ice and Fire diverges most sharply from its peers is in its relationship with its audience. Star Wars and Harry Potter are, at their core, stories of resolution, tales that build toward definitive endings. Martin's world, by contrast, remains unfinished, its greatest mysteries unresolved. That incompleteness has given rise to a participatory culture unlike any other: fan theories, fan fiction, elaborate timelines, genealogical charts, and entire communities devoted to piecing together the puzzle of the narrative. The story's open-endedness invites readers and viewers to become co-creators, interpreting clues, debating prophecies, and imagining possible futures. It has transformed fandom from passive consumption into active engagement, a collaborative act of world-building that continues long after the last page or final episode. The darker, more adult nature of Martin's work has also broadened the audience for fantasy. Where Harry Potter is often a bridge from childhood to adolescence, A Song of Ice and Fire speaks directly to adult readers, exploring mature themes with unflinching honesty. It does not offer moral lessons or tidy resolutions. Instead, it asks hard questions. What is the cost of power? Can justice exist in a corrupt system? Is history shaped by great men or by chance? In doing so, it appeals not only to fans of fantasy but to historians, political scientists, philosophers, and psychologists, anyone interested in the complexities of human behavior. And yet, for all its differences, A Song of Ice and Fire shares with Star Wars and Harry Potter a crucial commonality: it builds community. Conventions, online forums, academic conferences, and fan events bring together people from across the globe who share a love for this world. It inspires creativity, art, music, writing, and fosters dialogue about some of the most pressing issues of our time, refracted through the lens of fiction. Like all great myths, it gives us a shared language to explore who we are, where we come from, and where we might be headed. If Star Wars is our modern mythology of hope and rebellion, and Harry Potter our myth of growth and friendship, then A Song of Ice and Fire is our myth of complexity, a story that refuses easy answers and forces us to grapple with uncomfortable truths. It is a mirror held up to the human condition, a reminder that history is written not by destiny but by choices, and that power, for all its allure, always exacts a price. In the pantheon of pop culture, Martin's creation stands as the most challenging and perhaps the most honest of the modern myths. It does not tell us what we want to hear, it tells us what we need to confront. And in doing so, it elevates fantasy, and storytelling itself, to something more than escapism. It becomes a tool for understanding the world around us. And like the greatest myths, it will continue to evolve, adapt, and resonate long after its original creators are gone. The final chapter of our exploration will turn toward the horizon, toward the unfinished story, the legacy still being written, and the question that lingers over all myths: what comes next? For if the past 2 decades have proven anything, it is that A Song of Ice and Fire is not just a phenomenon of the present. It is a story that will echo deep into the future. As we stand on the threshold of the end of our journey through A Song of Ice and Fire, it is worth pausing once more, to look back on the road we have traveled, to consider what we have learned, and to acknowledge that this is not truly an ending at all. Like the seasons of Westeros, stories like this do not end cleanly. They change, evolve, and circle back on themselves. They linger in memory long after the final page is turned or the last scene fades from the screen. And in that lingering, they become something larger, not just narratives we consume, but worlds we inhabit, metaphors we live by, and mirrors through which we see ourselves. We began with Origins, with George R.R. Martin, the boy from Bayonne who devoured books and built worlds in his imagination, who transformed history's bloodiest struggles and humanity's deepest contradictions into a fictional realm that feels achingly real. We watched as that world took shape, brick by brick, banner by banner, built from fragments of medieval history, myth, and memory. We saw how Martin's imagination did not merely borrow from the past but interrogated it, reassembling its pieces into something new, a world that asks timeless questions about power, loyalty, justice, and identity. We delved deep into that world's foundations, its ancient myths and living religions, its noble houses and their tangled legacies, its dragons and others and shadows that defy explanation. We explored the psychology of its people, their ambitions, their fears, their transformations, and in doing so, we recognized parts of ourselves. We examined how history shapes destiny, how identity is forged in fire, how power corrupts and redeems, how memory binds and blinds. And we saw how Martin uses fantasy not as an escape from reality but as a way to illuminate it, stripping away the illusions of simplicity to expose the messy, complicated truths beneath. We crossed continents and oceans, from the iron halls of Winterfell to the sun-baked pyramids of Meereen, from the iron-bound traditions of Westeros to the dazzling diversity of Essos. We followed the story beyond the page, into the boardrooms of HBO, onto screens across the globe, and into the homes and conversations of millions. We witnessed the transformation of a literary saga into a cultural force, one that reshaped genres, redefined television, and challenged the boundaries of storytelling itself. And we placed A Song of Ice and Fire within the broader constellation of modern myth. We saw how it stands shoulder to shoulder with Star Wars and Harry Potter, not by imitating them, but by offering something profoundly different, a myth for an age that mistrusts easy answers, that understands the complexity of history, that sees the grey between black and white. In Martin's world, there are no chosen ones, no neat victories, no happily ever afters. There is only the human condition, beautiful, brutal, and endlessly complicated, played out on a stage as vast as the imagination itself. Yet for all that has been said, for all that has been written, one truth remains: the story is not finished. The saga of Ice and Fire is still unfolding, its most important question still unanswered. Who will triumph in the struggle for the Iron Throne, or will the throne itself prove meaningless in the face of larger threats? What role will prophecy play in the final reckoning? Will the cycles of history repeat, or will someone find a way to break them? Even Martin himself has not yet given us those answers. The tale continues, both in his unwritten pages and in the imaginations of those who ponder what might yet come. But perhaps that is fitting. Great stories are not meant to end neatly. They are meant to live, to evolve, to provoke, to inspire. A Song of Ice and Fire is no longer just Martin's story. It belongs to the millions who have read it, watched it, debated it, and reimagined it. It belongs to the writers it has influenced, the worlds it has inspired, and the conversations it continues to shape. It belongs to the past that birthed it and the future it will help define. In that sense, the song will never truly end. It will be retold and reinterpreted, its melodies woven into new stories and new myths, echoing across time like the ancient songs sung in the halls of Winterfell or the temples of old Valyria. So, as we prepare to enter the final movement of this exploration, a reflection on legacy, on unfinished stories, on the power of myth itself, we do so with the understanding that A Song of Ice and Fire is not a closed book but an ongoing conversation. It is a living story, still growing, still changing, still resonating. Unlike the turning of the seasons or the rising and falling of dynasties, its end will not be an ending at all, but a transformation, a passing of the torch from author to audience, from present to future. Winter, as they say, is always coming. But so too is spring, and with it, the promise that stories, like life itself, never truly die. They endure. They evolve. And they sing on. Chapter 25, Legacy, Unfinished Endings, and the Future of the Song. The legacy of A Song of Ice and Fire is as complex and multifaceted as the world it depicts. It is a saga that has already shaped literature, television, and popular culture, yet it remains suspended in an unfinished state. A story without its final chords, a song that pauses mid-melody. This tension, between what has been accomplished and what remains unresolved, is itself part of its legacy. For it reminds us that stories are living things, not static monuments, and that their meaning often lies as much in the questions they leave us with as in the answers they provide. At its core, the legacy of Martin's creation lies in its challenge to the fantasy genre. Before A Song of Ice and Fire, much of mainstream fantasy was defined by the shadow of Tolkien, noble quests, clear moral lines, the triumph of good over evil. Martin broke that mold. He offered a world where morality is grey, where history is cyclical, where power is brutal and corrupting, where victory and survival often come at unbearable cost. In doing so, he legitimized a new form of fantasy, one rooted not in escapism, but in realism, one that held up a mirror to our own world's politics, conflicts, and moral struggles. He demonstrated that fantasy could be as sophisticated and relevant as any literary genre, tackling questions of power, justice, gender, and identity with the same depth as historical fiction or political drama. The television adaptation magnified this legacy. Game of Thrones became the defining cultural event of the 2010s, reshaping the television industry and proving that fantasy could dominate not just niche audiences but the global mainstream. Its influence can be seen in the wave of high-budget, serialized epics that followed, from The Witcher to The Lord of the Rings of Power. It set new standards for production value, storytelling ambition, and audience engagement, altering the expectations of what television could achieve. Even its controversies, the debate over its later seasons, the dissatisfaction with its rushed conclusion, became part of its cultural footprint, reminders that endings matter as much as beginnings, and that no adaptation can escape the weight of audience expectation. And yet, for all its achievements, the greatest legacy of A Song of Ice and Fire may be its unfinished nature. The final volumes, The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring, remain unwritten, their absence both a frustration and a fascination. This incompleteness has transformed the saga into something more than a story. It has made it a puzzle, a shared act of speculation and anticipation. Fans pore over Prophecies, debate possible outcomes, and imagine countless futures. In a sense, the unfinished nature of the series has democratized it. It belongs not just to Martin, but to the global community of readers who keep it alive in their imaginations. This open-endedness resonates with the deeper themes of the series itself. History in Westeros is always incomplete, always contested, always shaped by perspective. Stories are never definitive, they are interpretations. In leaving his story unfinished, Martin may inadvertently have created a work truer to its own philosophy than any tidy conclusion could ever be. The Song of Ice and Fire is not about clear resolutions but about the complexity of life itself, messy, uncertain, and often unresolved. Its unfinished state reflects that truth. Looking forward, the future of the saga is both certain and unknowable. HBO continues to expand the franchise with prequels like House of the Dragon and other planned spin-offs, ensuring that Martin's world remains present in popular culture for years to come. New generations of writers will continue to draw inspiration from his work, building their own worlds of moral complexity and political intrigue. And fans, scholars, and critics will continue to debate, analyze, and reinterpret the saga, keeping it alive as a living myth rather than a closed book. But perhaps the most enduring future of A Song of Ice and Fire lies not in what comes next, but in what it has already accomplished. It has given us a lens through which to view ourselves. It has reminded us that power is never simple, that history is never settled, that identity is never fixed. It has shown us that stories can be brutal without losing their beauty, that fantasy can be deeply human without losing its sense of wonder. It has become a shared cultural language, a myth for a modern age that mistrusts certainty and embraces complexity. In the end, the legacy of A Song of Ice and Fire is not just about dragons and thrones, battles, and betrayals. It is about the enduring power of storytelling itself. It is about the ability of one person's imagination to capture the attention of millions, to spark conversations across continents, to shape the way we think about fiction, history, and ourselves. It is about the reminder that stories, like history, are never truly finished, that they continue to live as long as they are remembered, debated, and retold. The Song of Ice and Fire may one day reach its final note, whether in Martin's pages or in the minds of those who imagine its end. But its echoes will continue long after. Like the great myths that came before it, the Iliad, the Arthurian legends, the epics of Tolkien, it will endure not because it was finished neatly, but because it spoke to something eternal in us, our hunger for meaning, our fascination with power, our struggle to make sense of a world as beautiful and brutal as the one Martin created, and as the one we inhabit. The song is unfinished. And perhaps it always will be. But that is its power. For in its incompleteness lies its immortality. And so the story goes on.